This meeting of the Committee of the Whole to order at 5:31 p.m. Please call the roll.
Ms. Pearson?
Present.
Mr. Rollins? Ms. Mohammed? Mrs. McCulloch?
Here.
Mr. Siegel? Mr. Connor?
Here.
Ms. Stanford?
Here.
With 4 present, 3 absent, we have a quorum.
Before we go any further, thank you, Connor Childers. He's working behind the scenes to produce the board's broadcast on Channel 20. I also wish to welcome Superintendent Student Advisory Council Representative Kylie Olenichek. We do okay? Thank you. And we're welcome to you, and you're here from Jefferson High School. And I want to remind everyone that we'd like to hold our questions until after each of the presentations are complete. First item that we need to look at is the meeting minutes from February 1st of 2022. Are there any changes, corrections, or additions to the meeting minutes? If not, and I see no lights on, is there a consensus to approve? Yes, 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 thank you. I'm going to hand the floor over to Ms. Stanford. She's going to lead us in the internal-external stakeholder committee portion of the meeting.
Thank you. It's my understanding we're going to do the student recognitions first. That's correct? Okay. Tonight, we are excited to recognize some of RPS 205's outstanding athletes who have risen to the top of their respective sports. To begin, it's been a busy month at Eisenhower Middle School. Both the 7th and 8th grade boys basketball teams finished in 4th place in the IESA State Boys Basketball Tournament in February. The 7th grade team finished their season with a final score of 25-1 in Class 4A, the largest school class. If there are any representatives of the 7th grade team present, please stand and be recognized.
Well, let's recognize them anyway.
All right. The 8th grade team finished their season with a final record of 22-3 in a nail-biter, losing their final game by only 3 points in overtime. If there are any representatives of the 8th grade team present, please stand and be recognized. Okay. Congratulations to both teams and their coaches, families, and friends on their exciting state run. In cheerleading, both Eisenhower Middle School and Flynn Middle School sent teams to compete in the IHSA State Cheer Contest in January. Flynn's cheer squad finished 24th in the state at the 2022 Small Team Routine Division. If there are any Flynn cheer squad representatives present, please stand and be recognized.
All right.
Yeah. Eisenhower's cheer squad finished 8th in the state at the 2022 IHSA Small Team Routine Division. If there are any Eisenhower cheer squad representatives present, please stand and be recognized. We'll clap anyway. Congratulations to both cheer teams. East High School sent 2 students to compete in the IHSA State Wrestling Tournament. Sophomore Lee Smith qualified at the 285-pound weight class after finishing 2nd at the sectional tournament. Freshman Donald Cannon qualified at the 126-pound weight class after finishing 3rd. At the state tournament at the University of Illinois, both athletes fought hard and made it to the 2nd day of the tournament. Freshman Donald Cannon made East High School history, making it to the podium and finishing 5th in his weight class. He's the first freshman in East history to place at the state tournament. Congratulations, Donald and Devin. Please stand and be recognized.
All right.
Lastly, thank you coaches, school staff, and families for supporting these athletes and encouraging them this season. Congratulations to all.
Ms. Stanford, will you do a picture? Will you do something to acknowledge the wonderful students who made it here so that they can be recognized and at least bring them forward?
Sure.
What do we do, Earl?
I miss us kind of fist bumping too.
I know. You used to be able to come across the table and we would be able to all touch, so. Is there anybody here for recognition who was not, who we missed?
I think you said Devin Smith, and it's Lee Smith.
Oh, it did say Devin at the end. It said Lee in the beginning. He's right.
And
Lee Smith. I apologize about that, Lee. Sorry.
well, I'm glad we have it checked. Do we have, Kathy, if we bring them forward and out in the hall, can you take a picture of the group that's here and we can put that on the website or something? That would be awesome. So we have the cheerleaders, the wrestlers, and do we have anyone else? So Ms. Bayer here will put you in and get your photo. Thank you so much for coming, because students are what it's all about. And how many of you are back next year? Anybody a senior? No. Everybody's back? So we get to see you again next year? Thank you. Woo! And thank you, parents. I hope you heard that. We know that they can't do it without you.
Thank you, Jean Lee.
Okay, moving on. Students from Auburn, Guilford, and Roosevelt High Schools participated in the 36th Annual Illinois Snow Sculpting Competition, held January 27th, 28th, and 29th at Sinisippi Park. Students worked in teams to carve incredible sculptures from packed blocks of snow. They put in a ton of effort, and the results were amazing. Connor Childers from the Communications Department captured our students at work. Auburn High School's block was called T-Rex. Roosevelt's block was named Snow Adorbs. Guilford High School's block was called No Porpoise in Wearing Pants. Guilford's team was awarded the Fred Gardner Award. Fred Gardner competed in the Illinois Snow Sculpting Competition for years, and more recently has volunteered his time mentoring the high school teams competing. This award is given to a team that exemplifies characteristics similar to Fred Gardner, like working together to overcome an obstacle within their sculpture, assisting another team in the time of need, etc. Congratulations to all our teams for your teamwork and creativity. On Saturday, February 26th, over 100 people gathered to celebrate the 9th class to be inducted into the RPS Athletic Hall of Fame. Those being honored included Rodney Myers from East High School. Rodney was a three-sport athlete and baseball's leading hitter in the NIC-10 conference in 1986. He was named All-Conference shortstop in 1987. He was the first player from the NIC-10 to make the major leagues since 1930 and played in the MLB for 9 years. Jametta Bland from Auburn High School. Jametta was a three-time NIC-10 All-Conference basketball player. She's still the number 3 all-time scorer in RPS 205 history. The Guilford boys soccer teams from 2002 through 2005 qualified for IHSA state soccer 3 times during that 3-season span. In 2003, they finished second in state, and in 2004, they finished third. Coach Tom Swalbach, football coach at West High School and Guilford High School. Tom coached the West Warriors from 1966 to 1988. He led the team as Big 8 Conference co-champions in 1968. Big 9 co-champions in 1971, and NIC-9 conference champions in 1980. Dan Miller, an avid youth sports advocate who was recognized with the RPS 205 Champions Ball and Hall of Fame Service Award. He spent more than 25 years building and supporting Rockford Elementary Basketball Association, known as REBA. To view the inductees award videos, visit the RPS 205 YouTube channel. This week's top item in the 205 Vibe was February COVID-19 update. Last week's top item was Stiles Elementary School demolition. Our featured blog post is Jefferson TV, Jayhawks launch weekly newscast. This broadcast is student-led and well done. Be sure to read the full blog post on 205 Vibe. Our newest podcast is Rockford University Partnership, growing RPS 205 graduates into RPS 205 teachers. Mr. Dotson Jr. sat down with Jessica Paquena Mendoza, Ryan Callahan and Tony Ramirez, 3 Rockford Public School alumni enrolled in the Education Pathway program at Rockford University. These 205 graduates are currently student teaching in Rockford Public Schools at Risa, Guilford, and Lincoln, respectively. In their interview, Jessica, Ryan, and Tony share insight on the importance of connecting with students and developing relationships to increase student engagement, being culturally sensitive to create a welcoming environment, and the impact the pandemic has had on teaching and learning. Let's listen to a short clip.
Teachers are not only just teachers, they're counselors sometimes. They are a second parent, sometimes even the only kind of parental figure for some of our students. And I don't think a lot of society really understands the amount of time and energy it takes to wake up in the morning and step into that classroom and be ready, to be with these kids. It takes a village, and we're all doing it for these students.
Make sure you check out the rest of the podcast on the 205 Vibe. In legislative news, thank you to the board members Jude McCulloch, Denise Pearson, Cameron Muhammad, and David Siegel, who participated in the legislative breakfast at East High School on Tuesday, February 8th. Representative Vella and Representative West engaged with the board members regarding a wide variety of topics. Dr. Jarrett, I cede the floor to you to recap some of the highlights.
Well, I think the biggest topic that we're dealing with moving forward, we have a really powerful program that we've grown, our NIU LEAP program. And one of the things we are hoping to accomplish from a legislative perspective is allow the 20 RPS employees, many of whom are paraprofessionals, many of whom are parent liaisons and are in different non-certified positions. As they are studying in the NIU LEAP program, we are in the process of advocating for the ability for those individuals to substitute teach while they are doing the work. So currently the legislation requires a bachelor's degree. There is something moving forward that our local legislators have supported that drops it to 90 hours, but we are also hoping for a pilot program in Rockford that would allow at 30 hours the ability for individuals to substitute teach. We haven't landed that yet, but we are hopeful that that will allow us to solve 2 problems. One, help these individuals who are in this program during a 2-year academic stint to be much, much more ready to be effective as teachers in 2 years because they will have spent time actually substitute teaching. But number 2, it could help address an immediate shortage we have of substitute teachers. So we are hoping that this legislative priority can move forward. Thank you.
In internal external news, I will turn the floor over to Dr. Tiffany Brunson, who will give us an update on student listening sessions.
Good evening. Thank you. So, in the beginning of the school year, I'm not sure which one of these meetings it was, but it was very early in the year, we talked about the goals and the purpose of listening sessions. So I'm going to give an update. So as of today, my department, we have conducted a total of 16 of these listening sessions, and that is 13 total student, 1 staff, and 2 community. The goals and purpose of listening sessions RPS, we are committed to empower and position our students as storytellers, as leaders, co-creators, organizers, and partners who advocate for student-driven solutions to educational inequities. Listening sessions are a powerful feedback gathering technique. It provides systematic methods to gather feedback from stakeholders to drive decision-making. And there are 3 parts. In listening to our students deeply, we are here to learn about patterns that are working or aren't working in our school system. We want to partner with our students as stakeholders, as the most important stakeholders that we have in our district. And then we want to work together to design a new system and new ways of being and new ways of working, and making sure that what we are doing, that relationships are at the center of making this a equitable learning environment for all of our students. And some of the common themes that came out of those listening sessions were students wanting and having a desire to really feel like they belong. They want to have a sense of social and emotional and physical safety in their schools. They want to have more social emotional learning supports. And they want their teachers to take the time to get to know them and have good relationships with them. Some of the things that students brought up that they were concerned about is that sense of belonging. Many said that it's still lacking, and it is definitely something that we want to focus on. They want their voices to be heard, and they know that there is a great need for change in how RPS handles school discipline. And some of them even talked about a need for a change in perhaps how the school day is structured. But a lot of them showed lots of empathy, and they understand that the staff are dealing with a lot of stress. Lots of it has been exacerbated by COVID, but they want to make sure that these things are addressed, and they understand that there are issues in their community where the community members aren't feeling like they're welcome, and they would like more an increase in our support and focus on the disproportionate number of teachers of color. And lastly, I think the theme that just kept coming up is that their deep desire for a sense of belonging, and knowing that this is something that we really want to focus on, and we're definitely moving in the right direction. So I think it's important for us at all times to make sure we're centering our student voices and making sure that we're uplifting and amplifying their voices, and making sure that when we're making our decisions that their voices are equally as important and that they're heard when we're making these meaningful decisions that affect them. So that's my update. Any questions? All right. Go ahead, Jim.
No.
All right.
Yes, I do.
Yes, Ms. Pearson.
In the area where they feel a lack of sense of belonging, did they identify anything specific? What triggers that feeling?
Mm-hmm. One of the things that was a common theme of, and I think I mentioned it, that they want the teachers to take time to really get a chance to know them. One of the questions that we ask in our student listening sessions, we ask a question about, do you have a trusted adult? Is there someone in the building that you trust? Is there someone in the building that you feel connected to? And oftentimes, many of them said that they did not.
Thank you. And given the typical school day, what suggestions or recommendations would you offer as the Director of Diversity to be able to implement the getting to know that student? Because one of the challenges is some teachers feel like there's just not enough hours in a day to get things accomplished.
Well, we have some structures in place. You know, we have just started using panoramas as one way of us getting data to find out some of those issues and just being able to highlight and lift those up. The other is part of what we are using in a few schools, and we're trying to cascade it out to other schools, but there's something called Copilot Elevate that we're using, and one of the important parts of it is that it is a tool where teachers are serving their students very specifically in their class. And the goal of it is for them to be able to hear their students' voice about, one of the things is they talk about student belonging, they talk about is the work meaningful, and things like that. So there's like 6 components to it. It provides teachers with data very specifically to their classroom, and it also, the really important part of it is that it provides them with strategies on how to address those low-scoring parts of the survey. And so really, it just has to be intentional. It has to be something that we value, and then it has to be something that they work at, because we all know relationships take work, right? But we first have to think of it as something that we value and that we want to do, and then therefore we'll put the work in order for it to happen.
Thank you. And this opportunity is at every school?
Yeah, it's at every school. And we're working with the principals and to bring it to, it's from middle school up to high school. Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Thank you very much.
Our next update will come from Maureen Kirschman, who will tell us how the Live, Learn, Play call to actions are going.
Hi, I am Maureen Kirschman, Family and Community Engagement Supervisor. As you all know, we launched the call to action out to our community organizations on January 15th and went into it with 3 separate waves. Wave 1, which just closed out on February 15th, and I am very pleased to say that we are on our timeline, which is very exciting. With the closeout of Wave 1, we had 21 proposals that came in from community organizations, and they were notified today of the status of their proposal. 7 of the proposals that came in were ready to begin the contracting phase and with their proposals, and we'll be working with them in the upcoming weeks to get them ready for April board. And of the other organizations, they have been notified that we will require a little bit more time and some additional information before we can move forward. Wave 2 closed today. I checked those numbers right before coming down, and we have 21 proposals in for those, so that puts us at 42. It's very exciting, and we will begin Wave 3 on June 1st, which will close on July 1st. Any questions? Okay, thank you very much.
On to the board calendar. This month's board opportunities include the Women of Achievement Luncheon and Student Art Gallery Walk. As always, check out the board calendar for details on these events. We will end our committee with a presentation from Heidi Detman, Handle with Care.
So I'm coming over here to present so that I can stand alongside our partner in this work, Mayor McNamara and the Mayor's Office on Domestic Violence and Youth Crime Prevention and the Rockford Police Department. So tonight we have a seemingly simple process, which has taken us months of partnership and work, real work, to come together and make this seemingly simple system happen. And so I'll start with a description of sort of what it is, and then I'd like to invite Mayor McNamara to talk to us about why it matters so much for our community and for our children. On the surface, Handle with Care is a simple reporting procedure. Essentially what happens is, in homes and in neighborhoods across our city, there are violent incidents that happen on a regular basis. Oftentimes, children are either victims of these incidents or they are witnesses to them. And so they carry that trauma inside of them, and when they show up to our schools the next day, we don't know. And we know that what we do know is that staff in our schools love our children, and they want to, begin their relationships with grace and kindness and understanding. And there's some really important information that would help them do that they currently don't have access to. They might not know why a student has their head down, why they might seem a little bit distant or even act out behaviorally. So Handle with Care acknowledges that with a simple communication structure, we can give adults in the school who are closest to children when they arrive in the morning some really basic but critical information to help them build that bridge, have an awareness of what might be happening for a child, and then link that child to the support that they need. So what is this reporting system? We've worked with our IT department and the county IT department as well to automate a report that pulls simply a student's name and their school that they attend. That will come over into our system. It will be identified for our assistant principals, our principals, and our social workers to let them know that such a student is to be handled with care. That's all the information that we get. We don't get any personal details about what might have happened or who might have been involved. That is not the focus. The focus is simply to acknowledge that the child may be bringing with them something traumatic that they either saw or experienced. That will come up as a simple report with the student name and the words "handled with care." That assistant principal and the social worker every morning by 7:30 will have that information in their hands through our student information system. They'll check their daily report, and then they will notify the adults, the classroom teacher or paraprofessional, perhaps a BIS, a parent liaison, adults in the school who work closely with that child, that so-and-so child is to be handled with care. And from there, we begin with grace and kindness, and then we become observers, and we make sure that we're just have an awareness of that child throughout their day. And if there's anything that seems a little amiss or that the student may need some support, our social workers who are trained to do this are our first line of support. And so the teacher or the other adult in the school will simply alert the social worker, and the social worker will take it from there. And we have systems, MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support, already in place in our school, and then that's where the process will carry through. Some children may need these kinds of supports right away during the day. Others might not. But this is just one more piece of information that helps us really become trauma-informed and raise our awareness of all the experiences that children have that they bring into the classroom. Now, you might say, but the police aren't always on site when there are things that happen to children. That's true. And so we're encouraging our system to use Handle with Care not as the end, but really as the beginning, for asking the question, how can we truly create trauma-sensitive environments in all of our classrooms, but most acutely to these students who have been directly impacted in the past 24 hours? How can we welcome them warmly into the school environment and meet their needs? So I'll hand it over to Mayor McNamara to talk a little bit more about the why.
Awesome. Thank you. First, I just want to say a sincere thank you to Rockford Public School staff. And just so you all know, as board members, you have a phenomenal team working and representing you. Big thank you to Heidi, to the legal department, and to the IT department. And one, also, I should say thank you to all of you for considering this initiative. Also want to say a sincere thank you to the City of Rockford's IT and legal department, if they're watching or ever going to listen to this. Yeah, they are. But also we have Deputy Chief Refit and Director Cachapalia here with us, and both of them have made a huge impact on this program and much more. So big thank yous to them. Okay, so a couple of things. One of the most important, if not the most critical piece to Rockford Public Schools is your teachers. And so the why is your teachers have told us this is really important. We have an educators team that meets with educators across the district about domestic violence and about trauma that our youth are carrying with them, and they have stated that this is a critical need. So that's one reason. Two, I would say, we both struggle with very real things. You are struggling with getting educational attainment levels with certain groups of our students up to the level you all want them to be in, that we know that they can achieve. We at the city are struggling with often those very same students with too much violent crime taking place in our community. And this program not only impacts the individual and does it in a very loving and touching way, but it also follows the data. In the city of Rockford, we can tell you right now that of those youth we arrest for violent offenses, 75% of them had some form of trauma early on in their lives, often in their homes due to physical or sexual violence. We can tell you that from 2016 through 2020, that 90% of those who committed a murder or were a victim of a murder, if you trace back, they too also had some form of trauma early on in their childhood based on physical or sexual violence in the home. So we're focusing a lot of your time and efforts on those students. We are doing the same out on the streets. I can also tell you that the data also shows us those young people who have been impacted by trauma have lower educational attainment levels. Those young students impacted by trauma have higher rates of violent crime as they grow up. I will tell you also that we had this awesome opportunity to meet with Mr. Hand and Mr. O'Brien, who are actually here this evening, and doing amazing work at Welsh. They actually already do a makeshift handle with care. They do it on their own through reading reports. And there was a quote that was given in our meeting. I believe it was Blake who mentioned, Blake Hand, Principal Hand, I should say, who said, all I need is 2 minutes. If I know in advance 2 minutes that a young person is coming into our school with this emotional baggage and a weight on them, I can change that student's day. I can change our entire staff's day. I can change the culture of that school with just 2 minutes notice. And the last thing I would say is we all like to think, especially as elected folks, that every single meeting, every single day, we're making this amazing change in people's lives. And often we are, but this is one of those programs that actually has the opportunity to make a dramatic impact in the work of your amazing teachers, your staff, the lives of those kids and their families' lives. It has an amazing impact to change really the trajectory of how we address education and public safety throughout our community. And you have that opportunity, and just would love your support for this awesome initiative. And again, thank you to your guys' team here as well as the City of Rockford's team. Thank you.
So I'll take any questions that the board has, and we also have some folks from our team, including the Regional Office of Education, who's coming along to support the professional learning with this initiative. And so we entertain any questions that we can help clarify for you.
Mr. Connor?
Yeah, is this based on a national program? And if so, do we know what kind of results came from it?
That's a really great question. There are lots of communities that have adopted versions of Handle with Care, most prominently, I believe, in Virginia. I have not found a community necessarily of our size and breadth. Yep, no. We are a little bit of pioneers in this area. And another way that we are kind of starting a new, paving a new path, I guess, would be to automate the reports. We are not aware of another system that pulls the police reporting system and the student information system automatically to make a match. Across our research, what we found is it required human, like an actual written email to an address that had to be manned by someone that then had to be farmed out to the school. And through the work of Jason and his team, we were able to automate that. In terms of results, if you look at the community in Virginia, they measure their success really by the number of referrals that have been made. But that community is not quite the same size as ours. So we'll be kind of monitoring our own goals together.
From the technical standpoint, do we have much of this in place today? And is there development work that we're going to have to do? And what kind of support will IT have to do?
Do you want to take it? Go ahead.
So you're the brand.
So, Mr. Connor, we've been working on some test data for the last several weeks to prepare for this with the city IT director as well as their database administrator, and we've done some trial test data, and we've already got everything ready to go once we're ready to pull the trigger on this, and we've made a connection. So we're doing some cross-referencing between the police record system as well as our student information system to make sure we have a positive match, and they're able to populate our student information system as well as notify those individuals that would be looking at this data on a daily basis to remind them, go look at your Handle with Care report within the student information system. So we're pretty much ready to go.
Are there security checks in place and who will actually have access to this on the staff?
So we're using our student information system. We've got what's called role-based security set up in there. So we're giving our principals, APs, and some others access to that. So only the need to know would have access to these specific records.
Are we keeping track of who accesses these records?
We can, through our notification system, through ClassLink, we'd be able to grab that information on who's actually logging in and navigating to that particular report, and as well as our logs within our student information system.
Yeah, I would recommend that. That's one of the things in these kinds of systems. There's usually, or not usually, a lot of times there's overall security concerns about who can see it. So I think having some kind of monitoring would be something. Are we going to track anything from this? Any outcomes? What can we expect?
I'll turn it over to Heidi in a second, but we do have the capability of doing that because we're collecting in our student information system, which is built on IBM Cognos. So we do have the ability for reporting in the future if that's something that the direction we're headed.
So can I ask before you leave? And so is that in Decision Ed essentially that we'll have this? Or? It's
using our student information systems, IBM Cognos platform.
So it's the application itself, not really the back end for all the database work?
It's in the back end. It's all through our SQL database.
Okay.
Yep.
On the other side of things, in terms of ensuring that when a referral back to a social worker is made, that's going to be documented in Panorama, and we'll be able to track progress of those students as well in Panorama.
And do we know, so when it's in the student information system, will we have reporting on how this affects our students? As in, and which schools and so forth, so that
we'll be able to see any intervention plans that were launched as a result of a Handle with Care referral, and then monitor that student's progress in terms of what tier of service, what kind of intervention, those kinds of things we'll be able to have access to.
Yeah, I mean, I know that that part of the assumption here is that we're taking it so it's anonymous, so, in that sense, on the after side. But I was just wondering if we're going to follow the numbers in terms of the impact, so that we say the percentage of schools or whatever, so that we know who it's affecting, and that might help us for planning.
Yes.
So that is going to occur?
Yes, and we'll be able to do that either through SIS or through Panorama.
Okay, and just the last thing is there any legal requirements for this kind of program? Do we have to report to the state? Is there anything that, because it's both police department it sounds like, is it county level or city level? City. It's only city level. So that, is there any kind of obligation for us to report anything to the state on this?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. All righty.
Ms. Pearson?
Thank you. So given this initiative, and will it alter or make a positive impact on the way we currently handle student discipline for a more positive outcome?
I don't know that I can say yes, absolutely, because it's going to depend on what kind of discipline we're really talking about. But what I can tell you is the goal is that we're there proactively and not after something has happened. And so as a team, the principal, the assistant principal, the social worker, the teachers, the adults around that student are actively aware and responding with de-escalation, referral to the social worker, taking some time out, taking sort of pressure off things in the classroom, so that we're proactive about what that student may need rather than waiting for it to manifest itself in a behavior. Sure, yep.
So really wonderful question. Just to add to it, when you hear Ms. Brunson's report about students wanting to know that people know about them and care about them and belong, I think this ties right actually along with that. They may not know the background mechanism that it's coming from, but you just take my family for example. If my daughter who goes to Haskell is walking in with all of this emotional stress on her shoulders, to be able to have a social worker just know about it, as opposed to Miss Holcomb saying, well, why is she talking? I'm going to send her down to talk to Miss Leathers, talking out of turn. Why is she sleeping? Why is she acting up? The social worker will know what's going on. It potentially has, we hope, dramatic change in discipline, increase educational attainment, and decrease violence longer term. But I think it has great potential.
Thank you.
Ms. McCauley?
So there's no one else in the region doing this, is what I...
Not yet. Harlem has, I think, dabbled.
Yeah, Harlem tried it with their previous superintendent, and they never had it written, like a written agreement. Mm-hmm. We are formalizing that with you. And the previous superintendent, I'm failing to remember her name, Dr. Morris raved about it and thought it was really exceptional. Then she retired and it went away.
So, not all of our students live in the city. I'm in a little pocket that's county, so.
You can always come in.
Yeah. So the sheriff's department would respond to anything at my home or anybody on my block. Those students, that kind of information, because this is just with the city of Rockford, those students will not. Are we talking to the sheriff's department? Are we just looking to see how it goes with the city, and what we'd like to do?
Same concern. Also, great question. So same concern I think all of us have. We want all the kids to get the same level, right? So I think the initial thought is right now, let's pilot this and see how it works. Let's make sure that staff at RPS is good with it and make sure that we're seeing positive outcomes. There's not much going to be left of this school year once it really gets fully implemented, and we'll have the summertime to make any tweaks to our agreement, our processes, internal at your side, internal on our side, and then be able to go out and say, yes, this is something that we should be bringing other partners in, like the county.
If somebody shows up, say, for example, a family at the Peace Center, but it's not the police who have brought them there, but certainly there must be a turning point if they're showing up at that location. Is there a way that we'll have a connection with that, or is this only associated with the police intervention, with some sort of police intervention?
So not if someone, if someone comes to the Peace Center, you would not know that. But if it was police intervention, you would know it. So, if something horrific happened at my house tonight, they would know about it. If tomorrow my wife decided to walk into the Family Peace Center with my daughter Olympia, you would not know about it.
Okay. And the impetus for this, did it come from the district or the city, or where was that?
The city served as a convener, really. The Family Peace Center and the Mayor's Office on Domestic Violence in particular served as a convener to bring the police department, the school district, and then the Regional Office of Education all together. And we've been meeting every Friday for quite a long time.
Longer than Heidi would like.
No. We've been meeting every Friday for quite some time, knowing that we needed to forge a partnership, and Handle with Care was a really great concrete step for us to do that, and sort of simplify the way that we work together. And as we began our work, last September, really, I said we need something that will really be something we can execute together and build some momentum on our ongoing partnership to support the youth in our city.
And what is the regional? What is their part in all this?
Regional Office of Education, represented by Sarah Bates, who's with us tonight as well, is really the focus for professional learning. She'll be helping us to develop the professional learning for social workers, for assistant principals, and for teachers. We'll be putting that module onto Public School Works, but she's also sort of a resident expert in launching this in a district. She's done it in her previous role in Maywood, I believe. And so she's been kind of a consultant and a partner, and then the professional learning side of things for us.
Okay. And then you've spoke a couple of times now about goals. So is there a set of goals or metrics that you're going to be looking for? What are you going to be looking for to determine if it's successful? Because in the intro, you talked about the fact that, or at least Tom, you talked about the fact that, 90% of those who are up for murder had some sort of trauma when we're not going to be that far down the way to see that we were successful. So what are we looking at in a more short term?
In the short term, I think what we're really going to be looking for is ensuring that those reports have come in, that we have evidence that they've been responded to. We want a 100% response rate. That's sort of our first metric is the reporting system working? And then from there, I think we're going to have to know and understand a little bit more about what this looks like in practice in schools so that we could set more student-based goals.
And that leads to the question of, you've been meeting every Friday, but now if we put this all in place, and I have nothing but accolades for all that has been put into this and the idea of being able to respond to those children. But going forward, what kind of oversight, continual improvement do you all have planned or looking at?
Right now we're learning, but I wanted to remind the board a couple of other initiatives that we have happening all at once, and all of this is to sort of be trauma-informed as a district and to put our focus squarely around the social emotional needs of our students. So Handle with Care is one strategy, and our first metric is 100% response rate on the reports. But we also have Crisis Prevention Initiative or Institute training, and that is verbal de-escalation. So no matter whether a child is handled with care or just in the classroom environment, we're training all staff April 29th on how to verbally de-escalate a situation. We also have the board-approved $2 million contract with Rosecrans to bring in that Tier 3 support. So that's another responsive action. We have the revisions to the Student Code of Conduct, which really put an emphasis on intervention and not just consequences. We have our focus on MTSS and the standards of practice in our system-wide framework. You've approved the Panorama SEL screener. We are using that data now to proactively work with students in small groups. And then finally, empowering students to seek their own support through the Dial Care contract that you'll learn more about in the Planning and Development Committee tonight. So while Handle with Care is our focus right now for this presentation, I wanted to make sure the board could see sort of the larger landscape of our goals, which is that students have the tools that they need and the wraparound supports that they need to academically do well, but also thrive. And so we'll be continuing to navigate our way through all of these contracts to help us really reach better outcomes for students.
Can I add to your?
Yes, please.
You had a good question about the impetus, and I think we answered it well on the meetings and how the partnership came together, but I really think, quite honestly, the impetus is your teachers, your students, and the data. I mean, we know unequivocally that the more trauma someone's experienced at a younger age, higher violent crime. We know unequivocally the more trauma someone's experienced at a younger age, lower educational attainment. That can't be good. We have to intervene, and often, and for too long in our community, it's went unmitigated. I think our teachers are saying that they are seeing in the classroom, specifically probably right now, more than I've ever heard, the amount of social emotional needs taking place in our students, be it COVID, whatever that may have led to it. And then our students. We don't talk to as many students as you guys do, but we talk to folks who are no longer students, who are criminal justice involved, I will say, who have told us that time and time again, something took place early in their childhood, and we as a community have continued to fail them because we never actually stepped in and intervened, because we never had the data set to know or the willing partners to collaborate on something that can really be a changer for their lives.
I would just like to add that I think that this is the most positive initiative I've seen come to the board in a long time. I'd like to thank the City of Rockford, the Police Department, and the district for everything you've put into this. I think it has nothing but potential good to do for our students, so thank you. Ms. Mohammed? Kirsten, sorry.
No worries. So first, I too would like to thank Mayor McNamara for his efforts in collaborating with RPS 205. I think it is imperative that we as a community work together as I've said for some times. I would, if it's okay, ask if Ms. Sarah Bates, can raise her hand so I can see who she is. Thank you. I just wanted to put a face with the name. Thank you very much, and thank you.
Could you introduce who else is here with you as part of this? Because you mentioned names, but they were...
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
We have Director Jennifer Cachapalia, and we have, as of Friday, the newly minted Deputy Chief of the Rockford Police Department, Chief Reffett.
Okay, thank you. And Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That's the end of our committee report.
Excellent. That's a good way to end. And there's no consent items to preview? All right. Thank you again. Mr. Connor, I'm going to cede the floor to you for the Performance and Monitoring Committee portion of the meeting.
Okay, tonight we have 2 reports for the board. The purpose, as a reminder, the purpose of Performance Monitoring Committee is to monitor our progress on the board's key priorities. Tonight we'll hear the mid-year update from the Academic Return on Investment team studying the district's foundational literacy program, Reading Horizons. Following that report, we will hear from Matt Zedeker, who will report on the results of the Standards of Service Survey. As a reminder to the board, a preview of these items was provided in the weekly Superintendent's Board update, and I'd like to welcome the AROI team, including Matt Zedeker and Melissa Douglas, to deliver their report.
Thank you, Mr. Connor. There we go. Thank you, Connor, for having the presentation up. Good evening. As Mr. Connor referenced, the AROI team will be giving the board an update on our Reading Horizons, the Tier 3 AROI that the board has selected for us to study. But I always want to root us back into our work and all of the work with our AROI as well as our system-wide framework, tying it back to our equity imperative and making sure that the work is in alignment so that we are all working towards the interrupting of the predictability of outcomes for our students. We've seen these slides numerous times, but it always is good to reference back that really we want to ensure that all of our students have access to a high-quality school. And so we want to take those red and yellow schools and turn them into blue and green. And ensuring that we have a successful, high-quality school in every neighborhood. So as we talk about our academic return on investment, we thought it appropriate to really think about how Reading Horizons focuses in on student achievement. So as the board has been updated before, Reading Horizons is our foundational literacy program, which is really the launch point for the work towards our universal goal of third grade literacy. As we look at the system-wide framework and really the whole continuum of learning, Reading Horizons is situated with that third grade reading as a standard of practice, which again continues to build on itself as we look at graduation rate and ultimately the success of students. So we are going to update the board on the AROI portion of Reading Horizons, but we wanted to kind of bring the board back to some of the previous presentations that we've had as we're updating the board around our system-wide framework, and in particular, the dashboard for our standards of practice. So as you see on the screen is what we have shown the board before, that Reading Horizons is a standard of practice. So it's really important to note as we think about implementation, as we think about the focus of Reading Horizons, not only is it a focus of our Tier 3 study and who this program works for best, but also how it impacts our larger work within our system-wide framework. And so as we look at the scores, those hypothetical scores with our Reading Horizons, we wanted to kind of give the board a visual of what that could look like. And so what you see on this slide, on the left-hand slide, are percentages from the first observation for Reading Horizons and what that hypothetical score would look like on the right-hand side. This is not the actual score for standards of practice for Reading Horizons. That is after the second observation, and so what you see in front of you is the first. So these numbers, again, are just hypothetical in terms of how that would be populating the scorecard. But we thought it would be important to see how those percentages would equate on that dashboard. So as we look at the dashboard and the number, I think what's also important to highlight for the board is the usability for our building leaders and our school improvement teams as they take a look at standards of practice and the dashboard. And so what we're creating are interactive drill downs for every dashboard so that principals and school improvement teams with teachers and others can really see what those scores are made of. And so this is a representation of what the drill down, the data that would pop up from the drill down on our dashboard for the standard of practice of Reading Horizons. So you can see these are the different items within the checklist of our standards of practice. And this is really great data for principals. We had one principal in particular use this information as they dove into PLC work to find out where the gaps were, where implementation was not as high as it needed to be and where we weren't meeting that threshold. And so this type of data and getting it and having access to it for continuous improvement measures, I think is really powerful as we continue to refine not only the implementation, but then taking it to the next level as we look at our students in the reading continuum. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Melissa Douglas to dive a little bit further into Reading Horizons and the AROI study.
Thank you, Matt. Good evening. Thanks for providing me this opportunity to speak with you again. So as you know, in RPS, the 205 teacher leaders selected Reading Horizons after a rigorous review process prior to its first use in 2017-2018 school year. Since that's occurred, we've continued to pull administrators, instructional coaches, and teachers closer to this work to learn more about their perspective. Why? When it first launched, there was kind of a negative opinion about the program for a number of reasons. Since then, what we've learned through surveys, through recent surveys that we've shared, and also through just interactions with coaches, teachers, and administrators, is that there has been a shift in perspective around buy-in. And this is really important as far as the investment that teachers have within the classroom. So there are some quotes pulled from the survey that are available to you on the slide. A couple of things I want to highlight include feedback around professional learning that has occurred in the buildings has been supporting the positive increase of opinion around Reading Horizons. Also the ability to group students so that we can truly target instruction. Most importantly, I think, is the understanding of why. So when I'm speaking about the understanding of why, there's been a shift since we even implemented Reading Horizons, kind of sweeping the nation around what's referred to as the science of reading. And to summarize, it's the latest and greatest best research on how the brain develops and how students learn how to read. So we've just kind of been making our way, myself and coaches, supporting the buildings to build capacity or understanding for teachers and administrators around what is the science of reading and how does it align to Reading Horizons, which is our program of instruction to support foundational literacy. A couple other things that we've seen is that there's a positive student increase from that fourth quote there around student growth, because teachers are starting to see that students are transferring these skills, which I'll refer to more a little bit later here. And then also positive for teachers is this common language that teachers are sharing around instruction and literacy. So I think it's really important, thinking about this why, to also hear directly from the field. So we have about 2 or 3 minutes that I'm going to have you hear from Mr. Blake Hand and Mrs. Patty Strell, 2 building principals in the district, to kind of share their story and how perspective is shifting around this program.
Good evening. I'm Blake Hannon, the principal at Welsh Elementary, and at our school, our vision is for every student to acquire the foundational skills necessary to succeed in school and in life. And when we looked at our data over a year ago, nearly 3/5 of our students were scoring in the lowest level for reading on the state assessment. Our African American males were scoring even lower. We conducted student listening sessions with our students, and in our targeted demographic, they over and over discussed problems with things like hard words over and over. This kept coming up. So when we listened to our students, like Tiffany was talking about, they literally were telling us that they can't decode the words. So as we went back to our leadership team and started to formulate, kind of this why, we created a belief statement, which we say every single morning at our school with all of our students, all of our staff. And we say every morning, we believe that everyone can learn. We believe in the limitless power of knowledge. We believe in hard work and grit. We believe in positive learning environments. We believe that literacy is a civil right. When we know better, we will do better. So we truly do believe that literacy is a civil right, and once we got onto that as a staff, that kind of shifted our momentum in that we're not just dealing with a program here, we're talking about our kids and being able to be successful in their lives. And as Melissa was talking about with the science of reading, Reading Horizons checks off one of the boxes for the science of reading. Our students have to have background knowledge. They need to know stuff, so to speak. They need to have rich vocabulary. They need to be aware of language structures. They need to have verbal reasoning. They need to have literacy knowledge. They need to have phonological awareness. And what Reading Horizons really helps out with is the ability for our students to decode words. So if they can't decode words, if they don't have foundational skills in reading, it is nearly impossible for them to become skilled readers later in life. So with that has really shifted our focus in our school and has really gotten our teachers to kind of come along and really put a good focus on foundational skills and really use this tool to our advantage to really help our students and really provide equitable opportunities for our students. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Patty Stroll, principal at Bloom Elementary, and I have been there for 3 years now. And one of the things I noticed when I first came to Bloom is that our scores were not where I'd like to see them be. And going to some of the different principal meetings, I was targeting in on schools that were achieving, and one of those would have been Cherry Valley. And I asked Carolyn, what is it that you're doing that are making your reading scores go up? And she told me it was Reading Horizons, that they were doing it with fidelity. So I went back to my school and I talked to my teachers, did observations, and what I realized very quickly is that less than 30% of my teachers were using the program. And so what we did was we talked about it as a staff. We talked about the science of reading, and if we really wanted to improve our students' test scores, we needed to do the program with fidelity. And what I told them is, I want you to give it a try. I want you to trust me. I want you to do what we need to do to see, does the program work? You can't tell me it doesn't work if you don't use it. And so that's what we've been doing. So this very last year, starting in the summer, we have upped all of our professional learning. Teachers went to the summer sessions, and then we made a very specific schedule of what we would be doing this year with all of our staff. Melissa she probably knows my building as well as I do because she's been there so much. And I will tell you that the buy-in has increased with my teachers. They now believe in the program. They're talking about what they're going to be doing this summer to get prepared for next year and what they're going to keep doing. And so with that buy-in, then we will be able to use the program the way it's meant to be and to get the results from our students that I know that we will get. So, thank you.
So So just to really echo what both of them shared, is again around the buy-in of this program and the belief that if teachers believe in what they're doing and they feel confident, then that's going to be projected into their teaching styles in the classroom, and then students are more likely to grow. So that buy-in is really important, and I just thought that was worth mentioning and sharing because the program has kind of been an emotional journey in RPS. So wanted to let you know where we're currently at with that. So as a reminder, again, it is our foundational literacy program of instruction. This study is focusing on kinder through second grade general education classrooms. It was launched in the 2017-2018 school year, and it makes up a minimum of 50 minutes of our literacy block between the whole group instruction and then the software component, which we'll speak to. So this slide here is really heavy on content, but what I want you to notice about this is that you can see how complex the skills become in reading. And you'll notice as you just move down the column there that the program truly moves from simple to complex, in which our students start with sound and individual letters, and they move to slides, words, nonsense words, which is a form of assessing what students really know, and then to more complex words with different vowel sounds, multisyllabic words, focusing on decoding skills. So we start at that very, very basic letter, move to that word, then the phrases, sentences, and then more complex texts. Because it's such a complex system, one, just learning how to read in general is very complex. It's not like a natural process. For students, it takes this explicit, systematic instruction. So I wanted you to just see how the program moves to really emphasize the importance of implementation and that we're truly using it as we should be. Mr. Hand spoke to this a little bit, actually. This is referred to as Scarborough's reading rope. And just to summarize for you, these are all of the different components that a student needs to engage in to become a skilled reader. Reading Horizons really lives in that bottom rung of the rope within the decoding section. So as Mr. Hand spoke to, the goal here is that our students are becoming increasingly automatic in decoding so that they can then free up their brain space, to say it as simple as possible, so that they can engage in the other language structures and components of literacy. So as students become more automatic and more strategic and become skilled readers, this is what's going to help them to reach towards your goal, our end goal of third grade proficiency. Really the community's goal is lifelong readers, right? Mastering well beyond third grade proficiency. But students really truly need all of these things, and just to focus again, kind of shine a light on it, Reading Horizons is truly the foundation. So we start with decoding, we start with the phonics component in order to be able to help students get to the other areas of this rope. This here, and you'll find additional items in your appendix, and for example, you'll see the full literacy block if you're interested in seeing it. So Reading Horizons, again, it does make up about 20 to 30 minutes of whole class instruction, but what you'll notice is the arrow moving across the entire literacy framework. And this is important because the lessons with decoding do not just live in isolation. The goal here is that our students are engaged in these skills across all areas of literacy all day long. So as I already spoke to, mid-implementation, this idea of the science of reading, just kind of sweeps the nation. And one thing that really rose to the surface with that is that what we have been doing in literacy and teaching literacy was not working. And this is beyond Rockford Public School District. This is everywhere. The practices that we were engaging students in was not really making them proficient and lifelong readers. And that's why, many of them were kind of, missing the boat. And to the point that, Mrs. Detman and Mr. McNamara spoke to as well, eventually ends up leading to additional things like trauma or struggles in the classroom, because they are struggling with literacy and learning, and they end up developing that anxiety. So, the goal here is that our students are engaged in this work all day long in order to grow in literacy. This next slide here is just a reminder of the daily core 4. So in your appendix, you'll notice that you have a copy of the observation checklist. So the observation and coaching checklist is what myself and instructional coaches utilize as a tool when we go in and we coach with teachers at a minimum of twice a year. And the components that we're really looking at are aligned to our definition of success that we rolled out last year around implementation. Just keeping in mind that in order to know if it's working or not, and for whom it's working for, we actually need to be implementing the program. So, the daily core 4 is comprised of review, instruction, dictation, and transfer. And to just summarize very briefly what this means, review is just that time in instruction when the teacher and student come together and they recall what they learned the day before so that they can make connections to new learning. That direct instruction component is when the expert in the room, the teacher, is explicitly and systematically showing the student, here's your new skill, this is what it looks like, this is why it's important, and here's how I want you to utilize it. And then when we get into dictation, that's the active engagement component of the lesson, in which the teacher and student are working together to allow students the chance to show or demonstrate can they apply this new skill that the teacher just taught them through reading. And then the transfer component is that we're not just living in isolation by just looking at letters and parts of letters and words on a board, but we're actually able to read or decode these skills within different text types. So this is also just another way to represent this, is this idea of we do, I do, we do, you do, do more. Just this gradual release of responsibility between teacher and student as they work their way through the program and the daily core 4 components. So what you'll see here are pictures taken from an actual classroom with this practice in action. So there's a picture of the teacher working with, I believe it's the digraph blends and doing direct instruction, and then you have your students who are actively engaged in actually writing words on the board, and then the students marking the words, which is one unique component of Reading Horizons. And then that transfer component, when we talk about students actually applying these skills to text or to reading, you'll see the pictures in which the two students are reading together, and then the last picture in the bottom right-hand corner is of a student actually going through the book and pulling out words and identifying different skills that are there, that are aligned to what the student needs to see. So the next couple slides here have actually been really impactful in this last round of coaching, and I want you to keep in mind the lens of if our end goal is an increase on the IAR assessment, and our end goal is third grade proficiency, and my goal, community goal of lifelong readers. When we talk about reading, moving from simple to complex, this here is an example of what's referred to as a decodable text, and to just kind of summarize what that means is a student in chapter 1 of this program, a kindergarten student, for example, could start reading a book like this within weeks of instruction. So instead of just working with the alphabet all on its own, they already have access to texts in which they can read and start identifying skills. In this example, it's the short vowel sounds that they're identifying by marking their vowels. You'll also see that they can even take those words and write a sentence. So even though this lives in that bottom rung of the rope in which our students need to become skilled readers, you can already start engaging students in work that supports the other areas around vocabulary and comprehension, even starting with a very simple text. That's going to move to more complexity. So on one picture here, you see what's referred to as little books. This resource is within our program of instruction. It is a part of the Reading Horizons resources, and it begins in chapter 2, where skills get a little bit more complex. Again, it just shows an example of how a student can already read and decode words, right? We don't want them living in isolation in which they're just learning skills for 30 minutes a day, and then it just stays there. We need our student to routinely, daily, ongoing, put their eyes in text and start to decode and read and identify what it is that they're reading. And then we move on to the level text, which is more complex. That's kind of the world we were living in prior to the science of reading really taking launch. Is like this idea of leveled text, so they are a little bit more complex and a little less decodable, into authentic texts. So to summarize what that means, just like a regular picture book or novel for a student. And then here's where it's really eye-opening. What you're looking at here, though it might be difficult to see, is a third grade sample question of IAR. So if you think about like a backwards design approach on how do we get our students to a point where when they get to third grade and they see an IAR question that asks them to independently decode, read, and understand two texts and then respond to it through writing using evidence from that text to explain their answer, it starts at the foundation. And that's what we're here to talk about today. Speaking of students, we're going to show you two very quick video clips from Cherry Valley Elementary School, where you're going to get to see students actually engaged in this work. And yeah, it's quite interesting to see. And then just this additional real quick video here.
My word is cake. I viewed it as X so under the A and a X under the E and a line on top of the E and a straight line over the A, and I drew a picture of red velvet cake, and my rhyming word is fake, and my sentence is I go get a cake. My favorite cake is strawberry.
Ruby and Brody are in Africa to go on a safari. And a safari is a trip to see how animals live daily.
So just a couple quick clips of seeing what this actually looks like in the classroom, including those additional transfer components. In your appendix, you will have a reminder of the definition of success around implementation. So what you're looking at here is from the observation data from round 1 of coaching, which actually ended in October. And what it's really important to highlight here, and I think Ms. Stepman actually spoke to this, or I'm sorry, I think Mr. Zedeker spoke to this, is that, for example, Lewis Lemon Elementary School, though they didn't have 80% of, on average, of their teachers implementing as a building, they were actually close to the mark with the teacher's average in the classroom. What's more important is that when Mr. Zedeker shared with you that drill down data that all of our building principals received in the month of February, is what they're doing next with that information, right? When we think about why is it important, why does it matter, and what are we doing next? So for example, with Lewis Lemon, directly following, actually like the day of, after they got this drill down menu, I had the opportunity to go to like a SIP cycle meeting with them. And they have their building principal, 2 deans, and their instructional coach. And they decided, after looking at that data, that the 4 of them would tag team support around their kinder through 3rd grade classrooms, each of them taking a grade level, going in 3 times a week, and focusing on the areas in which they were not meeting the fidelity checklist items. So where teachers were thriving and they were in the green, we high-fived them for that, told them keep up the great work, maybe even suggested that other teachers come in and see how that looks in the classroom. But where they were in the red and not meeting the implementation with fidelity, that's where the team at Lewis Lemon is putting their supports and their coaching and their feedback to make change. Another thing worth calling out here, just because it kind of sticks out like a sore thumb, is Conklin Elementary School. Has some relatively low scores there. So some things to know is that, one, they do not have an in-house instructional coach this year. And also is that since this first coaching round, which again ended in October, there has been a ton of support put in place for Conklin. So I imagine that we will see a growth in implementation. To give you some examples of what this growth looks like, they have been provided professional learning around the Daily Core 4, extended transfer. So what does the transfer look like outside of isolation, like we've spoken to this evening? And then also Susan Fumo has kind of rallied a few of her coaches to try and partner with individual grade levels at Conklin to try and go and support on an ongoing basis. So we are trying to support and wrap our arms around buildings that are truly struggling with implementation. And those are just a few examples of how we're doing that. So software is another definition of success, and what we determined is that there's probably going to be around an average of 42 hours by the end of the school year. So I know that question has come up when I've been here before, and the way we calculated that is that around 15 minutes per day on average. The goal is 20 minutes, but when you think about building stamina in 5- and 6-year-olds who need to be in front of the computer for 20 minutes, and breaks, assessments, quarantines, absenteeism, we average it out to around 15 minutes per day, and that's about 42 hours by the end of the school year. So this was the data captured by the end of the October coaching round, and on average we're around 6 hours across the district, and the goal would have been 8. So we're hoping to see an increase in software as well. Why does it even matter, right? I think that's always really important is, what are we doing here? Why does it matter? So the software component matters for a few reasons. One is that we have seen a direct correlation between active time in the software and student growth. What I mean by active time is students who are engaged in actual skill lessons, not just clicking next, not just wasting time, not playing games, not playing in the clubhouse, but truly engaged in skill lessons, which serve as a pre-teach or reteach for students. Additionally, teacher active time in the software. So how are the teachers utilizing the data reports that are embedded within the program to reset, to reteach, to really truly target instruction? So that's one area in which software is important. The other is also that by looking at the software and where students are at within the progression of software, we're able to not only tell if the students are on track for like the end of year sequence for their grade level, but also we are able to differentiate between whether or not a student has actually been actively engaged in the software or passively engaged in the software. So when we think about supports and instructional shifts between the end of the last coaching round in October and the one that just started last Monday, these are all of the professional learning opportunities that buildings have had access to. So we've made it to around 9 schools to support and build capacity or understanding around the science of reading and how Reading Horizons aligns to research and best practice in reading instruction. The Daily Core 4 for new teachers, refreshers for teachers who maybe were struggling with it, additionally new teacher support. Robust data reports professional learning. We invited the building principals and coaches to a 3-hour professional learning with Reading Horizons on how to utilize the reports. And then on Institute Day offered another one for teachers. We had 5 buildings represented during that session. We've had the certified coaches training so that I think 11 more of our instructional coaches became certified coaches so that they are like truly equipped to support beyond Reading Horizons coming into town and supporting us. We also provided a full day training for our ESL, special education, and title teachers to really truly build that common language around instruction, right? If a student is leaving the classroom and leaving Tier 1 instruction, we want them to be able to build on the skills that they're learning in the classroom, so we really need a common language around how we teach literacy. So we provided that training, and then additional data dives. Many instructional coaches have engaged their teachers in data dives. I participated in that, and we've also had Reading Horizons come alongside as well and provide that. So from all the professional learning that we've engaged in, here are some instructional shifts that have been a result. So one is that more targeted instruction focused on skill groups. What does that mean? It means that I might need something different than Ms. Detman needs in a classroom, and Mr. Zedeker might need something different as well. But by targeting instruction, we're all getting what we need in order to move forward in literacy. Also, the emphasis put on decodable text. As I shared that first image with you on decodable text, that's what's going to allow our students at a very early start in this program to start reading immediately, which is really important. That shift from the old cueing system that used to occur in guided reading to now more of a decoding system. To summarize, it pretty much means there's been a lot of professional learning and instructional shifts around, instead of prompting students with things like, oh, look at the picture and guess what it means, which, yes, that used to be an instructional thing that people did and believed in, is, okay, look at the word, what sounds do you know, what sound does it make, what letters do you know, sound it out. So very strategic. Capacity built around the science of reading and its connection to Reading Horizons. That's going beyond professional learning, and it's a conversation that teachers are having in buildings. PDSA goals are increasingly becoming more rigorous and more aligned to foundational skills versus just like only the MAP continuum, right? They're actually pulling in the Reading Horizons data, the foundational skills that students need to form goals. And then many building principals are pulling weekly usage reports. And then they're communicating with their teachers around, here's how many minutes your students were on the software this week, here's how many minutes you were in the software reviewing data. Let's talk about this, whether it's a high five, keep up the good work, or whether it's, you know, what's going on and how can we support you if you're not able to get those minutes in during the day. So many instructional shifts have occurred. So when we think about looking forward, by the end of year data, of course, we'll have the hopefully increase in growth from fall to end of year with the spelling and word recognition assessments. And then also an increase in, we hope to see an increase with the round 2 for coaching around implementation. But what we're also going to be bringing to you at the end of year data is really a narrative and a story around our students. And I think that's come up a lot tonight, which is really important. When we talk about programs and talk about implementing things, it's so much bigger than that. It's bigger than our students. It's really about our community. So these are the things that our students are bringing to the table, right? Whether it's attendance, the engagement that staff feels around this, the quality of implementation, and levels of sustainability. So we're going to also be looking at all of those different characteristics and segmenting the data when we come to you at the end of year as well. So I open the floor to you for any questions that you might have.
Ms. Pearson.
I have one quick question. Can you restate the percentage of usage overall in our district for Reading Horizon? And is that data broken up in sub-districts?
So do you mean like looking at the observation and coaching checklist data as far as the fidelity of implementation, or the software usage, or the grade levels? I'm sorry, which?
So overall, because you identified that some teachers weren't using it.
Okay, yep, now I see what you're saying. So many teachers were not implementing with fidelity. really until it became a focus, honestly. I mean, around the AROI study, and became a standard of practice, and building capacity around why this is so important is when the shift started to happen around implementation. So there was a slight increase. I don't think I have that data with me, I apologize, from last year's implementation, from the fall to this year's implementation. So we are starting to see more of an increase of fully implementing the program. Did they answer your question or no?
And I think really the data is up on the slide that does answer your question, which is that district-wide, we have 60% of teachers who are implementing at 80% or higher. And overall, on average, the teacher observation checklist is at 77%. So to show you how close or far away we are from that 80% mark. So it's not organized by sub-district, but it is organized by school.
Okay, yes, I see the data clearly. My question was specifically about sub-districts, but if it's not calculated that way, I understand. But that was my
not
question
organized
regarding the sub-districts.
Yeah.
I see the data. Thank you.
Yes.
Ms. McCulloch.
Would, Mr. Bland gave a nice rundown on what is the new science of reading. I wasn't fast enough to write those. Melissa, can you give us those?
Yeah, like the gist of the science of reading. It's, to summarize, the latest and greatest best research around becoming a skilled reader and how students learn how to read. And what that encompasses is explicit, systematic, and sequential, meaning
he was
that...
more specific. He talked about the background, he talked about the rich vocabulary, he talked about language streaming, I believe, verbal. I just was trying to write them down and I wasn't quick enough.
Okay,
it
so that would
like
be
there was a list.
That would be Scarborough's reading rope. So what Mr. Hand was referring to are actually all the components
on the rope
that you see here on Scarborough's reading rope.
Got it. Mm-hmm. And how has that changed then? I mean, we had phonics, and Pennell or whatever, F&P for all those years, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, the books, and I know they're still available as kind of background stuff that some teachers are using, but how have we changed?
So a level text is not a decodable text. So when we think about phonics and students learning the letter sound at the word level and then moving into sentences and being able to read, to access a level text, I'll actually move to the picture of it, which is here on the right-hand side here. It's actually labeled level text. Imagine a student in kindergarten reading this level text. This is what we've been doing beyond RPS in the literacy world for years, in which I think it's fair to say, with the national pandemic issue as far as below third grade proficiency, that it has not been working because students cannot actually access or read the words within a level text yet. So there is a place for level text, just like there's a place for decodable text. So I do want to emphasize that it's not that we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. We're not saying, oh, because of the science of reading, we're only using decodable text. It's more a question of when. When do we use a decodable text versus when do we use a level text, and what purpose does each serve? Where a level text is a really great way to build comprehension and the upper parts of that rope, but a decodable text is supporting building capacity and practice in the lower part of the rope.
Is anybody else around when their kids had inventive spelling in Rockford in public schools?
Inventive spelling?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, inventive spelling is just when students...
Well, that was how they were learning to read. They just made, they would write it down however it sounded to them. And right. I mean, that was truly a system that we had.
Yeah.
So you referred to, you did make some reference to the IAR. The Reading Horizon only tests spelling and word recognition, right? Because that's what's on that bottom, that blue part of the rope. So how is it that you're, and I like the idea that you're starting, with, okay, here's what's on the IAR, and we're kind of moving backward, but what have we developed? I mean, because we don't have common assessments because we have integrated literacy, right? So it's not like we have a program. We used to buy a program from Pearson or other people, and it came with common assessments. So we decided to make our own up, and so we don't have those. But those used to be, I thought, aligned to the state test, whatever it was. Right now it's the IAR. How is it that we are aligning? Because this is just a portion of literacy, right? Reading Horizons. This is not.
It's the foundation of literacy.
Right. It's the decoding piece, but and I see the transfer part, but then there's that whole other part of the rope. So I'm trying from a layperson because you know this is. And I can't imagine that all the board understands it. But so I hope I'm not using your time unwisely. But can you kind of take us to how that will help our students?
So, yes, I can, and that's a great question. Because this is the foundation, students are not going to be able to access the kinds of texts that they need with integrated literacy or fiction, nonfiction text if they cannot decode at the very most simple level within a decodable text. So you are correct that this is just one component, and that is why we're here this evening, is to talk about this one component. But it is the most important component because students cannot do the other things if they have gaps in literacy. For example, in Chapter 1 of the program, students learn uppercase, lowercase, letters, letter formation, letter sound, and how to build CVC words or consonant, vowel, consonant words like cat, hat, mat, okay? And the CK spelling rule, which is actually kind of a game changer even for teachers, which is that K takes I and E, and C takes the other three, A, O, and U. If you didn't know why cat is spelled with C and kitten is spelled with K, that's why. So that all happens in Chapter 1. So if a student leaves, I know it's phenomenal, right? It blows your mind. I know, it's really exciting. So if a student leaves Chapter 1 without having mastered all of those skills at the very basic level in which they can decode a book like this, a decodable texts, they are going to have gaps in literacy their entire lives. This is when they master their short vowel sounds. If they have not mastered their short vowel sounds, making sense of why a long vowel eventually becomes a long vowel is going to be difficult for them. And to your point around inventive spelling, this goes beyond just reading and reading Horizons. This goes beyond just reading a leveled text. We also need students to be able to write and spell. So we're not only decoding, we want them to be able to encode and do additional skills, but it starts with this foundation. So you are correct that this is one component, but it's the most important component.
So my question was about the relationship of this to the IAR. You alluded to that to a certain extent. Do our
So Reading Horizons actually does have additional components within the reports that help support comprehension. If you do see in your appendix a few new definitions of success that we're focusing on, one is related to transfer and one is also related to the course progression. So there are reports that we are going to be able to pull at the end of the year that will demonstrate for us if a student is using these skills in context or in isolation, and that is a comprehension component. We also have
show up in the way that they do the state testing as well, or are you just doing that with? I mean, the transfer, that's what we were all about last year, right? That's all we talked about was transfer because that wasn't happening, and so it sounds like that's been a shift.
Yeah.
Well, we're continuing to focus on transfer, and the additional definitions of success give us the way to really see that, and then the additional measures show us how students are progressing through the course. So I think at the beginning of your question, you asked, we're only measuring spelling and word recognition in this program, but there's more components that we are measuring. It's just our definition of success is really focused on spelling and word recognition. So there are more assessment opportunities within the program rather than just that one assessment.
And I also, thank you, Ms. Stepman. I also think it's worth noting that if students need to be able to show success and mastery within the program before we can expect to see it outside of the program. So the goal is that we have our Reading Horizons assessments that are embedded within the program to assess these skills, including the spelling and word recognition assessment. But the end goal is that we're hoping to see a correlation then to MAP data and then a correlation to the IAR data. Another good example, just to kind of give it an analogy, because to your point around like the board members and the community's members listening, is to think of it as far as like learning how to drive a car. Like if a student, if a new driver were only to learn about how to drive a car while staying parked in a garage and never taking it out on the road and being evaluated and trying all the skills, then it's going to stay in isolation, but they have to learn those skills first. Same thing with, a sports analogy, right? Like learning skills in isolation versus actually playing the game. The students, we're building capacity around implementation, fidelity of implementation, and evaluating how students are successful within the program, and then moving beyond the program. But we have to start here.
When does integrated literacy start? What grade level?
It starts in kindergarten.
Okay, because you referred to time on with the students on their software, and whether or not it was quality time. So who's overseeing what they're doing on the software while they're on there?
So an additional definition of success that you'll see in your appendix is around the course progression, and that's how we'll be able to see how the students are doing within the software. So the data reports, the usage reports, will show a principal, a teacher, us at a district level, Reading Horizons, if a student is actively engaged in a skill lesson, meaning a phonics lesson, versus just playing games or just clicking next and actually not progressing through a lesson. So there are multiple ways to evaluate that. Teachers actually have what's called a message center, and they will get an alert in their message center if students are falling below 85% of mastery within a skill lesson, so that they can make instructional decisions based off of that message, and they get that every time a student falls below mastery within a skill lesson.
Is this like MAP, where if they make it easier or harder if they're not getting it at that part of the lesson? Does it?
No, so if a student...
Is it adaptive, right?
If a student, well, yes and no. At the beginning of the year, if the student meets grade level proficient, or the proficiency in spelling and word rec at the beginning of the year, it will put the students on an accelerated track.
No, I'm talking about a per lesson within the computer. If a student is on a lesson and...
So that's what I'm referring to, is that it differs. So for some students, because of what they've already demonstrated mastery on with the other assessments, it's going to be accelerated. So yes, it's different for them, but it's still the same content. Where a student who's falling below meeting, they'll actually have multiple opportunities to have that skill lesson before it's officially like a fail. So they'll get the initial lesson. If they score below the 85%, then the software will send it to them again, and it'll serve as like a reteach. And then if they pass, the teacher learns through a yellow marking in the message center that it took the student more than one time, but they still move forward in the progression. If they are below the mastery threshold, then the teacher gets a red alert in their message center that the student had that exact same lesson twice and still hasn't mastered the skills. So that's, a time where then a teacher would intervene with instructional strategies.
All right. I've had enough airtime. I'm sorry, but I'm going to end by saying we started this 2017-18. We're now we're in 22. And the fact that we still have schools that were at 0% in terms of teachers implementing, we've just not done a great job of making it happen in this district. And I'm glad we're focused on it. I think some of that comes, the board's focus as well, but it's just disappointing that we provide, and it's so difficult to get everybody on board, because then we don't know if it's working, right? I guess you do know the ones that are implementing it versus the ones that aren't, but that is that 0 at 2 schools is just really hard to take. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Great questions and great point.
All right, is there anything else on this? Okay, seeing none, let's go on to the second part here.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. The next report is the results of the Standards of Service Survey, and we'll have Mr. Zedeker deliver the presentation.
Do we say thank you to the principals that came? Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Okay, this is our report out on the customer service and standards of service survey that is a part of our system-wide framework. Really just want to bring back the kind of message we've been delivering in terms of the system-wide framework and really some of the why behind the importance of this work. And the 3 very big pieces to take away is that every student deserves success. Every staff member deserves clarity in role, and then everyone deserves to have the support they need. And so as we look at the standards of service and customer service, we really hone in on the clarity and role and then the support that's needed in the system-wide framework. I think the other key component to make sure that is out there is this is also part of that mutual accountability. As we think about system-wide framework, we spend a lot of time on standards of practice and universal goals, which is appropriate as student outcomes. But we also want to make sure that we are taking a pulse and making sure we're looking at improvements on how the central office is performing their services in order for the administrators and teachers to do their work in the school. And so the survey itself was broken down into 2 parts. One part of the survey was really around customer service and how well the departments did in terms of problem solving, providing information, being accessible. And then the other part was really around the direct 8 standards of service. And so tonight we're going to focus on the standards. You received the customer service reports as an attachment prior to tonight's meeting, and so those are broken down by department. And so the presentation really is going to follow kind of a progression through the standards. We will review the standard. We will go over the overall score out of 4.0, and then the third slide in the standard will kind of show the breakdown of how principals and assistant principals responded to that standard. And so for standard 1, as we look at standard 1, the district follows established processes, timelines, and systems so that teachers, support staff, and students have the resources and materials they need when they need them. Overall, the building administration gave the central office 2.92 out of 4. And this is the breakdown of the responses. And I think one thing to point out, and I'll refer back to it as we go along in the presentation, is you look at the size of respondents at 60. Not as many as we want. And that's something that we engaged our principals in. As we saw, our assistant principals and deans actually had a very low response rate to this survey. And we needed to dive in because in order for us to really enact some of the change, we want to make sure that that data is reliable and that we're getting the voices into the survey so that we can make changes. And so that is one thing that we noticed right away and one thing we engaged our principals in. Standard 2, faculty and staff have defined roles in the district's multi-tier system of support plan connected to the success of the whole child and in alignment with the district's universal goals. Building administration rated us 2.67 out of 4. And this is how it shook out. Standard 3, our schools are clean and well maintained with all work orders addressed in a timely manner. 2.8 out of 4. Standard 4, professional learning is available for all staff who support students aligned to the universal goals and standards of practice and accessible and easy to navigate. 2.85 out of 4. Standard 5. Surveys and other data collection tools drive both customer service improvement and school improvement. 2.89 out of 4. Standard 6, access to high quality and diverse staff members throughout the district, but with special attention to schools and classrooms. 2.62 out of 4. Standard 7, accurate, timely, and relevant reports, dashboards, and corresponding systems will be delivered to all schools and meet the needs of the end user. 2.79 out of 4. And then finally, Standard 8. 3 times per year, the central office learns about and responds to the needs of each school during school improvement cycles to target deficit or high priority items aligned to the universal goals. Standard 8 is 2.75 out of 4. So then what was next? We received this information, and one of the first things Cabinet did was to take a look at both the quantitative and qualitative responses that we received from the principals. Through discussion, the next step that we took is engaging principals. We didn't quite have a grasp on how to really break down the data that we received. We tried to gather some themes, some key insights, really some ways that we could engage our departments here at the central office. And so one of the first steps we did in a principal meeting was to engage our principals and to ask further questions. I alluded to earlier in the presentation, one of the first questions was why the low response, and what were we hearing from our assistant principals or our deans and why they didn't respond. We also wanted to dive in with some lower scores by departments from customer service. And so we wanted to get a little bit more of a focus group feel on the responses from the principals. And from there, I know that we sent out to the board some specific actions some of the departments are taking with the feedback we had received from principals as we think about how are we making adjustments from the information that we received. And so as we work through that feedback and some of those iterative processes, we will be giving the next round of the standards of service at the end of April. Typically what we'd like to do for standards of service is to give the first survey in October and the second one in April. That gives our central office a little bit more time to really digest that information, meet with teams, meet with our departments, follow up with principals to make sure we're creating some continuous improvement action steps. And so I think after we receive the information in April, it's really going to be a year-long data where we can use to launch the summer work and to figure out how we might continue to improve to offer our standards of service so that the schools are getting what they need to ensure that they're doing their job for our students. So with that, I would entertain any questions from the board.
So, Ms. McCulloch?
So it appears we're not going to be discussing the CS survey that was sent to us because you're just talking to these larger areas standard of service.
Yeah, we were just reporting out on the actual standards that are within the system-wide framework, correct.
Are we going to talk about these at some point as a board, or is this just
we
for
certainly
our
can. Yep. I mean, we certainly can discuss those at any point.
And I asked the question because it left me with a lot of questions and also very low response. And I understand that the whole idea, this as well, was anonymous.
It was anonymous. Yep. K-12 Insight, our partner, we thought it was very important to make sure that it was anonymous.
Did K-12 help you decide how you do your breakdown with departments, or did you all choose that?
So as part of the survey, The first question that principals answered were which departments had they interacted with in the last 6 months. So that way it forced them to then only score departments that they've had interactions with. So that way it wasn't wasting principals' time to go through everything. So that was the very first question on the survey that steered which departments they would rate in terms of customer service.
Okay. Were there not comments? Did people not have an opportunity to make comments?
Yep, there were fields at the end of the customer service as well as the standards to give us some qualitative feedback. And that's what the cabinet originally used to kind of look at the data itself, the quantitative piece, but then also taking a look at the qualitative piece and our process is to really try to take a look and to see if there were any themes or really key insights we could really kind of grab onto to take a look for continuous improvement. And that was one of the kind of outstanding things is there weren't really just any key insights or themes that were across the board, which really prompted us to dive into the principal meeting and to have some more focus group work with the principals.
Well, and with the limited number of respondents, I mean, some of these departments had one.
Yeah, and that skews the data.
Right, yeah. But which is why I was looking for the qualitative. Yep. And yet we didn't receive that. So if somebody can send that to board members, it would be, sure. I certainly think it would be more elucidating than just some numbers. I had a problem with, for example, curriculum, because it's just this big category, and you've got primary and when you've got secondary. Yeah. And then even in primary, I mean, I'd love to see how people are doing with how they feel about the literacy component versus the numeracy component. And yet it's all just one big bag. So if I'm in an elementary school and I want to, as a principal, want to rate, and my numeracy is, I just think it's awesome, but I'm having problems with the literacy. Do I knock everybody down and give poor scores across the board, or because there was no opportunity? So I had some questions and concerns about how Insight, put that together.
Yeah, and I would just remind, though, but the survey itself wasn't about curriculum itself. It was more about the service that's being provided. So it's whether it's the department.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
I'm not talking about not curriculum. I'm talking about the service that the literacy group is giving versus the numeracy. Sure. We had, all the stuff with special ed. I mean, there's a lot of places where it could have been more informative to you if it wasn't just a dumping ground. So that would be my feedback. And I'm not surprised on the low response. I don't think, I know of a lot of administrators who still don't trust us enough and feel like it won't be anonymous. And it doesn't matter how many times I push and say, we can't do anything unless you help us. And I don't know how we gain that trust. I guess I just don't know how we gain that trust. So, because you can't make it better if you don't know what's wrong. Right. So.
Well, hopefully we'll see in a month after doing something with the feedback and having the conversation, hopefully we'll see significantly better response rates. We also missed an opportunity to provide time in a principals meeting. And so I think carving out specific time will probably get us close to 100% next time, Ms. McCullough. I think the trust piece may not be the core issue in this instance, but we'll find out. If after giving them time in a principal meeting we still have a real low response rate, then we'll know we have a different issue.
That would be great. And we did that with parents, right? If we had computers available when they walked into the schools, we got much better response to those parent surveys. So that'd be great.
Any other questions or comments from anyone? One of the things I wondered on this is, out of this, there are different kind of scoring areas, and one of the things I'll say is, from the actual numbers standpoint, it translates, in my view, to about average to slightly above average. I mean, if you think 2.5 out of 4 is in the middle, I mean, even with low numbers, and one of my comments is when you have these kind of things, not always, but you tend to have the people that have something to say that will answer. almost always. So I thought that was kind of interesting. One of the things, and I read through, again, some of the questions, and one of the things I'll say, and I think that some of the wording is kind of interesting to me, and I think what I'd want to make sure is that if you're going to ask something, to ask it in a straightforward fashion, because sometimes it's kind of, and I'm going to read this one, and I'm not picking on any of them. Sure. But, you know, faculty and staff have defined roles in the district's multi-tiered systems of support plan, and I would want any of them to write out what that means, connected to the success of the whole child as opposed to their foot. And in alignment with the district's universal goals. I mean, you know, I understand kind of where this is going, and I'm sorry to make fun of it, but I mean, I think one of the things I'd recommend, and I should have said this before, and I just, you know, when I saw the numbers and read through it again, is I think sometimes on some of these, you know, these are busy people, and I think having some of the questions, you know, be, you know, a little bit more specific. I mean, multi-tiered systems of support just like jumped out at me. And I know you talk about this stuff, so I'm not saying you don't talk about it, but I think, you know, I'd suggest on some of these, I actually was frankly not disappointed with this in a way, because it's hitting us above average, or I'm sorry, average to a little bit above. All I can say is I think feedback is always, I mean, I've done a zillion of these, and I will comment, and I you know, being a techno nerd, I mean, come on, people. I mean, you know, blind surveys have been around now for decades, and so I gotta say, you know, you're probably not watching, but good Lord, I mean, these things. I mean, if you want, we could do a techno explanation on it, but I do think that. I do like the idea, and I will just say that having it convenient for people really does, and I like the idea of either using the time and, you know, make sure you give them the thing with the covering, though, like you do in the ballot, ballot box, so you know, you can't cheat and look over and see what somebody else is doing. But this is really, the one comment I do have, and I'm going to say about a number of the things that we're doing, I actually am pleased with the things that we're doing. And directionally, what I'm going to say is we've gotten a lot of criticism over the years. And one of my points is we are out asking people. And so it's not perfect, not all the results we would like, but the fact that we are taking time and really making a rigor around studies. And I'd like to discuss more on the customer survey, because I have some similar comments, but I think that I give credit to us as a district on this, because we are doing much more outreach, and I think we're trying to judge where we are. And I think from my point of view, you know, it doesn't have to be perfect. And what's the old saying that perfect is the enemy of progress? So, you know, I got to say I'm pretty pleased with this. All right, it looks like that's it. Do you have anything else, Mr. Zediker?
That's it for me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. And I think for us, hang on, let me look. Preview of consent items, and since we have the alphabet soup to end all alphabet soup usually, I'll just say, does anybody have any comments or anything on the consent agenda that you'd like to bring up? Oh, well, then I would say, I'm sorry, Ms. Pearson.
No worries. I would like to get clarity on the items listed. Is there ever a time where items that is indicated on the agenda is postponed? Okay, so I see that, bear with me one moment. Correct. Just bear with me one moment. I appreciate your patience. You know, actually, it is a closed session consent item, so there wouldn't be able to be any discussion, I don't believe.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there anyone that has anything on the consent agenda, board members? Nope. Okay. And I think, going back to this, that's the last for performance and monitoring.
Thank you, Mr. Connor. All right, I'm going to bounce it back to you, Ms. Stanford, for the Planning and Development Committee portion of the meeting.
The first item on our agenda tonight is the enrollment analysis, and I believe Rob Schwartz from RSP Associates is joining us via Zoom to present the report.
Yes, good evening. Rob Schwartz here. Are you able to hear me and see me?
We can hear you, but not see you.
All right, I'm up on my screen. Greetings. Welcome to this presentation about enrollment analysis. I'm sure when you received this report, and it was, I believe, 55 pages, you probably thought, how can we talk about this in about 10 minutes? That's going to be pretty easy. We're going to be at 100,000-foot view, and I'm going to tell you some of the things that have changed since the last time we did this. So 2019-20 school year was the last year that we did an enrollment analysis for your district. Previous to that, many of you remember some of the realignments that occurred at the elementary level and the secondary level. So I'm very familiar with your community, and it was a joy to see some of the new things that are happening in your district. I will always refer you to the full reports that you received for a lot of information. Like I said, I'm staying at the 100,000-foot view, but there are some interesting nuggets as you go through the appendix part of the presentation. So I always have different expectations. Read this page because some of the things may get into how you budget, what's head count, what's FTE. Those are important in understanding what enrollment was, is, and is projected to be. What I talk about with you tonight will be categorized in these 4 areas: enrollment and demographics, some things about development, and then most assuredly about projections, and then what do we need to be thinking about with this information reboot for what we now know in the 21-22 school year. So a little bit about enrollments. We're showing enrollment's going to decrease. And so I pulled out my last presentation to you in 1920, and I looked at what it was going to be for the 24-25 school year, and we're pretty much right on pace with what we thought the decline would be from 2 years ago. So that's good in knowing that we're not declining anymore. There are some other things that are happening when I get into the projections that are some gleaming possibilities of what this might mean for enrollment stabilization over the next 5 years. When we look at capacity, there are some challenges. All the elementary buildings, when we look at based on where where a student resides and how that relates to the attendance area, we have some challenges. But as we have school choice with programs and such, not so much an issue when we get into attend. Same thing with the middle schools. When we get to the high schools, we do have some issues at Guilford and Jefferson here in the first 3 years with both reside and attend of students. I'll come back to that so you understand that when we get to the projections. We did look a lot with the existing housing inventory when we have subdivision life cycles, when we see some new areas develop, always trying to understand what's happening. So there's some possibilities with some developments. We have many visuals that help you understand the district from a geographic perspective. So you have the district boundary, the existing elementary boundaries, the middle school attendance areas, and as well the high school attendance areas. We also want you to think about things with live birth data. This is one of the things that helps synergize what we're seeing with your future enrollment. When we look at the column of live births in Winnebago County, we have fewer children being born in 2019 than those that were being born, let's say, back in 2010, 2009, by over 500 children. When we look at 5 years later, the number of kindergartners we get in that school year, we get an understanding of what our share of kindergartners might be. When we look at 2017 to 2019, we give you a range of what that might be if we just isolate it with live birth data. And so that gives us a range of anywhere from about 1,600 to almost 1,900 future kindergartners just looking at live birth data. We look at the current conditions. We've broken the enrollment out by grade, head counts, for kindergarten through 12th grade. That's the top table. The bottom table is the cohort change as the students move through the system. Where we see red, that's a decrease. Where there's black, that means that we increase that enrollment as they cohort it from the previous grade to the current grade. Things that stand out in both of these tables. Top table is our senior class tends to be smaller than our incoming kindergarten class. But we see a lot of change for enrollment decline in the high school grades. You see it from 9th to 10th, 10th to 11th, and 11th to 12th. We reported that back in 1920. That still maintained what we've seen here the last 2 years. We look at migration. This graphic, different than maps that we've shown you in the past, we were wanting to isolate what were the trends, what was the actual data before COVID, during COVID, and now here in this year that maybe we consider post-COVID. So we see the example on the left-hand side. These are students that the previous year were receiving services, but then the following year, they were no longer receiving services. That's the green part of the bars. The black bars represent students that were not receiving services the previous year, but in that current year did receive services. So this gives us an understanding at the elementary level, middle school level, and high school level where we're seeing some of those changes, and are we seeing any correlation to what things were really 2 years ago. And you can see there's some things that we've improved, specifically when I look at in-migration of more elementary kids than what we saw in the 2 previous years. Middle school was pretty much similar to what we've seen. And then you can see in the high school, we had more high school students in migration than before. So again, this gives us that understanding of migration. We show you other visuals of where students are. So this is a heat map, red, and the darker the red, the greater that concentration of students. General observations, kind of covered some of these things, but again, look at the report. There's a lot of really cool things. We do isolate yield rate of students by the type of developments because we break the district down to these smaller geographic areas. What you're seeing here is by the existing elementary attendance area for K-5 students, how many students are we yielding for single family type developments? And the district average back in 2010 was 16. You can see here in 2021, it's 14. Us getting into some of the decrease of enrollment that we've had from 2010 to 2021. Again, you can see what that is for each of the existing attendance areas. Kind of exciting, interesting to look at things like, for instance, Lewis Lemon. We were at 29 in 2010 with this current boundary, and now we're down to 18. And you can see what that is. We also do the same thing with multifamily developments. Again, isolating those type of developments. How many students do we yield? And it's declined a little bit. We're at 15 for every 100 multifamily units in 2010. In 2021, it's 13. So again, you can see that by each of the attendance areas. We spent a great amount of time trying to get at the subdivision life cycle. So that got into housing and how it's been built, so the age of that inventory. And what you see on this graphic is the green lines represent the number of units at the start of that decade. The purple part of that bar represents what was built. And so you can see there was a lot more building activity in the 50s and 60s, a little bit into the 70s. And then you can see that it's dramatically declined. And a lot of this gets into the infrastructure, land use, comprehensive plan, all these different things, but we've not seen a lot of new building activity like we saw 50 plus years ago. We looked at other things like the average value of properties based on the assessor values, matched that up to all of our planning areas to try to understand what's happening. So then that helped us start to step into the enrollment projections. And so I already indicated that when I compared 24-25, which is year 3 of this projection, which was year 5 of that projection in 1920, we're right on task with where we thought things would be for year 3 for 2 years ago. And so back in 24-25, we thought there would be about 24,655 students in 24-25. We're projecting that it would be 24,418, so a little bit fewer number of students. Overall, the enrollments at the elementary level is stable, slight decline by the time we get to 26-27. We look at your K-8 enrollment, going to be very similar to what it is now. We will have quite a bit of reduction in the number of students at the middle school, where we're at about 5,300, and it reduces to about 49. We look at the high school, it's about 7,900 right now. We dropped to about 7,300 students in 26-27. Refer back to live verse and the table by grade. That starts to tell some of that story of how these grades move through the systems. So this gets me to the next steps. We have an annual agreement with you to look at some of these enrollment standards and see how they're going to impact your enrollment in future years. There's a lot of things that are in the appendix that will help administration with staffing, with some of the physical operations of the buildings. So annually reviewing this is a really good thing. We're also working with that next to last bullet point with a Northwest quadrant facility that will be the elementary international baccalaureates. So what does that mean as we start to look at those spaces, specifically with the dual language or TVE students, and how we can make sure that they have a good experience as we provide this other really cool opportunity in that Northwest quadrant. With that, I will yield back to the board. Questions or comments, I'll be happy to answer them. If I can't, I'll provide feedback through the district to provide an appropriate response.
Ms. McCulloch?
You did make reference to a couple of schools with capacity issues. You said that you would refer back to that. I thought when you were speaking high school, it was Guilford and Jefferson. There were 3 listed: Flynn, Eisenhower, and I don't remember, was Lincoln the other? So what was it were you going to tell us more about that?
Yeah, let me tell you a little bit about capacity, because if you remember, we did a capacity analysis for you years ago, and that's kind of the standard of how things start to look. So I'll go to the appendix, and so if we just focus on the high school, so we know where students are based on their address and how that relates to the attendance boundaries, and so that gives us our reside number. And in this appendix for each of the buildings, what that enrollment is in the green font, middle row for each of the buildings. But then we know with some of the programming options that are or are not available in buildings, students are going to different buildings. So that will be the bottom row for each of the buildings. And where we show shading in this orange peachy color, that's where it's exceeding what that functional capacity that's been identified for that building for how the facility could appropriately operate. I'm not concerned in your district when it's the reside because of some of the choices of where programs are located. Students are moving to buildings where those services can be consumed. But when we look at Guilford and Jefferson, these are two buildings that, regardless of whether we look at reside or attend forecasts, we're over what that functional capacity is. And so those would be buildings that we see as there's challenges. We have that challenge here in 21-22 in each of those two buildings, but it would continue moving forward for 4 years at Guilford and for all 5 years projection at Jefferson High School. So that's kind of the capacity, how it ties back to that. I'm sorry I didn't get to that earlier.
I mean, we have dropped a lot of buildings in the last 10 years to try to decrease our footprint. Do we get, I mean, you come back to us every year and we use some of this information to adjust the school boundaries, do we not?
We haven't adjusted the boundaries here for a bit. We hope the boundaries look good from the elementary, the middle school. High school, we don't have much flexibility. So if I go back to that slide, so sorry it's flashing up there really quick as I go through this. But if we look at the high school capacity, we have 8,030 seats based on these buildings that were evaluated. And you can see over the next 2 years, we're over what that functional capacity is. And we're really close now and close as we go into 24-25. And then it starts to get a little bit better as smaller classes work their way up into the high school. So that's one of those things of what can we do to make maybe some smaller changes. So that might be a next step. Do we need to do something, or are we hearing that the challenges are such that there needs to be a little bit better balancing? You just know that regardless of what we do over the next 2 years, if we were efficiently with that 8,030 capacity, we're still going to have problems at one of the buildings by a little bit just based on that capacity, and the enrollments is going to be over that 8,030 capacity number.
But you're saying because both lines aren't shaded for middle and elementary, we don't have that quite the same issue?
Correct. If I just go to the middle school facilities, you can see at the reside, yeah, there's issues, but as we move the students where those programs are or are not, we have adequate space moving forward over the next 5 years. When we go to the elementaries, or actually I start with the K-8 buildings, we are fine with what those enrollments are. And we can control some of these a little bit better at the district level because of some of the choices that are involved in that. If we go to the elementaries, this is over numerous pages because there's so many of those buildings. As you look at that, we have a couple places like Spring Creek where we get just slightly over in the attends. Again, we can control some of that attends when we're that close. And then as we go through the other buildings, I don't think there were any others that had an attend issue. So it was just Spring Creek for reside and attend.
You did reference the IB program that we're looking into doing in that Northwest quadrant, and perhaps you answered this question, but if it were to go, I mean, one of the places we spoke of was Conklin, but are the surrounding schools, say it wasn't and it was at Westview, or, but are those surrounding schools able to absorb students who opt out of that IB program who live in that area, in that particular?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think right now I'd say we're kind of in the draft preliminary conversations with administration on what that possibly could look like. And I think we have some incredible opportunities of maintaining some of that dual language TBE, TBI status of kids where they would still stay in that area and still have this opportunity of this Northwest quadrant. But I don't want to steal anything yet because I know it's a little bit in the preliminary stages as we try to flush out all the details specific to the timing. Is it specifically going to be Conklin? If it is, how do we look at things as it relates to Westview, Welsh, Lewis Lemon, and McIntosh? And what programs are already in those buildings, and can we make a good fit as we look at some of the options of where those students could be attending? But excellent question. And I think that's something that will come out here maybe in the next couple of months.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Our next item is sub-district boundary changes. In the year following the census, the school board is required to analyze and reapportion sub-districts as necessary to reflect the results of the census. If reapportionment is required, school board sub-districts shall be compact, contiguous, and substantially equal in population. Rob Schwartz will review current sub-district boundaries and provide recommended changes. Mr. Schwartz.
Great, you get to hear me again on the second report. So board member zone analysis. So again, as we started to look at this, we started with the 2010 census blocks. We started with your existing sub-districts, and our goal was to make sure that each of the sub-districts were within 10% either of what this ideal population would be, where we take the total population of the district, you divide it by the number of sub-districts, 7, we get what that ideal population is, and so we need to be within 10% of what that ideal population is. So first we looked at your existing sub-districts, what that meant with the 2010 census blocks. We then matched up with 2020 census blocks, and there were a little bit of changes between 2010 to 2020 as they make those census blocks based on populations and their modeling of the number of persons that they think would be in those census blocks. So that's kind of our baseline, our methodology. This visual here that you see up on the screen represents with the ideal population for the district. We have about 190,343 people, and so that gives us an ideal population for each of these sub-districts to be 27,192. And so then when we aggregated all of those census blocks into each of the sub-districts, which are represented by the solid colors, we put a yellow boundary around it just to make sure they popped a little bit. And you can see that we have some challenges specifically with District A having too few of people. So we need it to be larger. And there are some, and the other districts would then all still be within the 10%. But as we started to look at this, it's just not so easy because we can't slice the census blocks smaller than what they are. So some things maybe have to move a little bit differently to give you the recommended plan. So this was our starting point. What are the existing sub-districts? How does that match up with the census blocks? And was there a difference? And so there is a difference where we exceed by 10%. So what I'm going to show you here on this next page is what we worked with to try to create the new boundaries for the sub-districts. We're impacting sub-districts A, B, C, and D. And one of the things that we tried to focus on this was keeping the districts as much as possible as the way they currently are and the way they were established from the 2010 census block data. We have 3 changes that impacted getting more people into sub-district A. So we labeled them on this map as a 1 and a 2 and a 3. so we don't confuse ourselves with the sub-districts, which are letters. And so we have 3 areas with numbers and a circle around them. So we took an area out of sub-district C and moved it into sub-district A. And so that's where we have the circle number 1. And so this is off of Auburn Road here out on the west side. We then also took some information, some sub census blocks in area 2. We moved from area, look at my area, from B to A. So here across the river, B extended, and so we moved some of B into A. So that's why this pink block got a little bit larger. We then had an area that was in sub-district D. Since we moved people out of sub-district B, we needed more persons to bring them within the 7%, which was our goal, better than 10%, to allow for changes that could occur over the next 10 years. And so we moved this area from D into area B. And this gives us our balance of population where you can see everything is not either greater than 7% and it's not less than 5% from this ideal population in those sub-districts. It maintains things very similar to what we currently have. A little bit wordy, I even kind of was tripping up a little bit when we talk about census blocks, sub-districts, and people, so no longer talking about students per se. So again, a recap of our methodology and how we got to this. Again, we tried to disrupt the sub-districts as little as possible, maybe different than some of the things we've seen with other redistrictings across the nation. We're trying to keep something that makes sense, and we didn't do something that we're like, why did that happen? This seems pretty straightforward. Too many persons in some of the districts, not enough in one of the districts. How do we move them around? That concludes my presentation. Let me open this back up to the board for questions and or comments.
Mr. Connor.
So, without hiding it, if you look at F and G, I won't say that there hasn't been a lot of discussion in the general public about, frankly, wacky-looking districts, but F and G, as it is, have some, they're big territories, and I just looked at the population part. I will just, one of my comments is I really appreciate that you wanted to have a fidelity with the old ones, but I'm not so sure the old ones in certain cases really made sense. If you look at the way the overlap is between F and G, some of that overlap right in the middle, north of Sandy Hollow and in that area, looks a little strange the way they overlap. There's that one little section, and hang on, because my eye test only works so well for me, is I think that's between Broadway and Sandy Hollow, between 20th Street. And I don't want to go all the way over to Alpine, but if you look, G goes around and over and kind of through goes F. And I have to say, as the one who had to walk all that, and I'm sure June in G feels the same way, is those don't make a lot of sense. I'm just saying, I know what the numbers are, I'm looking at numbers, but I'm just saying how that's mapped out. Frankly, I thought that might be corrected this time around. The other thing that I'll say, and speaking of E, and I don't do E, but you've got that one little arm that comes down, and again, I know what numbers are, but it's like, I really thought that the shapes would be a little more regular because, of course, some of these, and you're always going to get it, I'm on this side of the block and you're on that side and you're one and I'm the other. You're always going to have that to a certain degree. But those, you have whole swaths that go in one to another. And it just looks, when I try to describe people what Subdistrict F looks like, I'm like, man, you're going to have to use your imagination on this one. I hope you're into geometry. So, at least on the others, one of my comments is, it's kind of reasonable in the sense that you see lines that, are going to kind of go up into each other, but it's not like here where, again, you look at the northern boundary of G and how that snakes around, and then F snakes back in. It's like an overlap, and I would say the northern part of F, same thing. You've got that little piece of E that comes down. So I don't know if you can do anything about it, because I understand you've got certain restrictions because of the census blocks and the rest, but all I'm saying is, this really, I'll go along with what the board wants, but I'm just, I will say I kind of thought maybe they might be fixed on a couple of that, and they're not. So that's my feedback.
Ms. McCulloch?
So I'm not sure why you did leave F as large as you did. And maybe it's because of where the difficulty in grabbing, the right number of people to move over. But with F being 4,000 more than G, it's, and I understand it falls within the 10%, but it just, is there a reason that you wouldn't try to equalize more? I mean, and I'm not asking for, that's not even mine. Can we ask these questions?
Can I answer that one? For sure. If I go back to the original situation with the 2020 census blocks, the priority that we had was where we had too few people, make it so that they're within compliance, and that made the changes with minimal change to anything else to what we're showing on this map. If we change some of or added additional priorities that would still have the need to be around the ideal population, but maybe addresses some of the uniqueness of what the existing boundaries are in some of these other sub-districts, we most assuredly could look at it from that perspective. The lens we came at it from was we have too few people in A. Balance that, the other sub-districts are within that ideal population. It meets the threshold of being within the 10% and our goal of trying to be within 7%. So I think the board could ask for something more at the beginning.
Lori Hoadley would like to comment as well.
Yeah, and I just was going to echo that staying within the 10%, and our goal also was to rely on the consultant to take more of a hands-off approach as far as having board members step in and draw the boundaries, and relying on the industry standard of 10%. So that's exactly what our consultant did. He did look at the 10%, and as long as it was within there, and they even narrowed it more, going down to the 7%. So I think that's why it is the way it is. I don't know why it was originally drawn to go in and out, but we're really trying to take more of a hands-off approach and not gerrymander in any way, and just follow the guidelines.
So if I might say so, though, but if I were to look at this, they sure do look gerrymandered, and I know they're not, and I understand the numbers. That's why I say I understand math, but and the goal is fine. Again, as I said, it just, you know, there's some real odd pieces to it. So I'm not trying to draw something. It's just, you know, when I look at it, you know, just on the surface, and since, and I mean, I don't want to speak for June, although I bet she's had some of the same conversations, is when you talk to people, they're like, well, who came up with this? And, you know, I've had that discussion many times, but as I said, if the board, you know, as a whole wants to do this, I guess, as I said, some of the anomalies of how it's laid out, you know, just, you know, as the people that have to walk it have seemed, you know, a little odd, but I've at least said my piece, which is, you know, WTH, I'm being nice tonight, so.
Well, and my comment is on numbers. It's not even on on the boundaries. So I'm not trying to gerrymander either. I'm just trying to understand why we didn't do a better job of equalizing when we have the opportunity, because I'll be honest, most of our constituents don't know what their sub-district are. Perhaps, you know, I'm what I mean on those borders. It doesn't matter. It doesn't affect me, you know, in my boundaries and where I'm at. It's totally a different sub-district, and I'm looking totally at numbers, and I didn't. That's all. So where are we at on this then? We just, I mean, because we would vote on this at our next meeting unless we would ask them to take another look at it, which we can do. Is that correct, Ms. Hoadley?
So if you wanted them to take another look at it, I would suggest setting a standard and not setting specific boundary issues. I would suggest if you want to look at 5%, they could do that, 3%, or I don't know how close you could get to the perfect number, which I don't think you would, but they could certainly draw it at 5% if that's what you wanted to look at.
And who gave them 10%? Did that come from?
Yeah, there was, that's just one of the industry standards, so.
So we gave that to them,
yes.
Though. They didn't come up with it and say to us, we think you should do this.
Right, there is no statutory guidelines as far as that's concerned, so 10% is one of the industry standards, so they could look at 5% if that's what you're looking for.
Based on the numbers here, 5% is achievable, is it not?
If we could possibly do that. Anything's possible with the way we have census blocks. Just need to know what that is, and if we can do it, we'll provide it.
I think, if I might say so, I'm sorry to jump in on this one, but it's you know, I'm having a hard time, you know, and let's just pick on where F and E go in, and you have that one little corner that's it's north of State, and it's hard for me to see what all the cross streets are right there, but it just seems hard for me to believe on the numbers side that where the current northern boundary is for E, that comes down, and that little piece of E that comes down is eliminated. That the numbers would be the same.
Right.
That's kind of,
I don't know. I don't know that, but whatever sorry, it looks like we had a construction accident over here.
Oh.
But
anyway,
yes, but
so
in any event, I don't know that he would adjust any of that based on whatever he comes up with.
Right, but I'm not arguing the percentage, you know, 7% versus 10 or 5 or what have you. All I'm doing is saying, but again, if the census blocks are, you know, kind of restricting us, I guess all I'll say is I don't want to slow this down. First of all, you know, we're going to have, I think, petitions start in the fall of this year?
Yes.
Yes, so like September, October, something like that? And so we have a bit of a deadline, so I wouldn't want to delay it, and if we're going to vote on it next meeting, I guess, the thing I'd say is I find it that some of the anomalies, and that one just really stands out to me, I'd have a hard time believing we couldn't make the numbers by adjusting, but as I said, I'll go along if the board wants it this way, and we'll just continue to make this a fun bar topic.
Michael, you wanted to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if the board would like, we could bring this back in April and still be within the time constraint. So we could have RSP look at this within a new standard of plus or minus 5% and see, with that, how that may make some changes with the different zones.
The one thing I will say is that most of the voters living in those areas probably already know and may not be happy if we make changes even further. So, but that's up to you guys. I would just suggest a standard versus going in and tweaking the boundaries yourself or identifying what you think makes sense.
Well, an A is still at the end of the day at a minus 4.8%, right?
Correct.
I mean, when you look at these others that are 6.8%, you know what? You guys have heard from Mike and I, June and Denise, you're the other board members here.
My thought is that we got within the targeted percentages with the least change, and that makes sense to me.
I'm interested in seeing what it would look like at that 5% area.
Mike?
As I said, I mean...
just would you be interested in the 5%?
I mean, again, this was never about the math for me, and as much as I might be accused of tweaking this, I mean, it doesn't. I'm neutral on it. I'm with June in the sense that, they had little changes, and it's kind of like it was, as screwed up as that is, but whatever. I mean. I appreciate it. Thank you, Denise. Really, I go either way. I just, I don't know. The one comment I have is just doing numbers based. You really don't know how this is going to turn out. And I know for her area, I mean, it's a bit of a change, and. So I'm open to it. I don't have to do it. I will just complain about it. How's that go? You'll hear me complain about it and that's fine. If it doesn't make sense to be changed, I mean.
Well, would it be? This is your. Would it be? What's your time frame if you were to go back and look at it for us, sir?
By next week, we could have something put together.
Because I really don't want the board to sit here and have to vote between map A and B, because then there could be prejudice involved. So is there a way to bring it back, to look at those numbers and bring it back to legal or Mike or whoever's, doing this? And if you feel that it's better, and if you don't, then bring the other one to us. Would that be?
I think Mrs. McCulloch, to your point, to avoid the prejudice, I really appreciate your consideration of that. I think the board is all trying to avoid that. I think Mrs. Holdley's suggestion was that the board would just pick a standard of 5% or 7%,
right.
And just whatever. Then, if we decide to go to 5% based on the board members who are here this evening, then 5% it is. But I don't think we should get involved in any way of determining the validity of the map so as to avoid any charges of gerrymandering. So I think if we're happy with 7%, then let's stay with that. If we're happy with 5%, if we want to change it to 5%, we should change it, but we should not be evaluating the two. Once you've suggested 5, then I think we go with 5.
I'll just say, to me, this again, I think it's very funny, and I will just say this out loud, of us gerrymandering to make it more regular. I think that's kind of the opposite of gerrymandering if you look at the history of it, but I'm just saying, you know, a common sense map, but don't mess with the numbers.
Well, that's the way they...
I understand that. I'm just saying, I think, you know, yeah, that's the wrong compass needle for me, but again, they don't have to change the percentages. That's...
So I heard a no from you, and I heard a no from June, and a 5% from Denise, and I wish the rest of the people were here to weigh in because, yeah, because it'll be tie even if I say 5%, so. We don't actually vote here. It's a consensus. Can we, can I get the board consensus outside of the realm of this meeting? Because we don't have a full board, and the answer is no. It has to be whoever's here.
We have to have an open meeting.
Okay. Well, it's 2 and 2, and that means it's a no, right? Okay. Stays as is.
Okay, so this will be brought back to the board for approval at the March 8th board meeting. Because of the statutory requirement to redistrict following the federal decennial census results, all school board seats are up for election. In order to ensure the term limits remain staggered, the board is required by statute to publicly by lot draw the new term limits for each subdistrict. This is done by separating the term limits into 2 groups. Group 1 will be for successive terms of 2 years, 4 years, and 4 years. Group 2 will be for successive terms of 4 years, 4 years, and 2 years. So at the March 8th, 2022 meeting, there will be 7 slips of paper. 3 slips of paper will have Group 1 term limits, and 4 slips of paper will have Group 2 term limits. The slips of paper will be folded and placed into a bowl from which each board member will draw, and at which time the redistricting reapportionment process will be completed for this decade. Are there any questions or discussions for the sub-district limits? Okay, this will be back for our approval on March 8th board meeting. Our next item is the 2023 budget requests. I'll turn it over to Michael Phillips to present the fiscal year 23 budget presentation for operations.
Good evening. So I am here to present Operations Department preliminary FY23 budget. We follow Goal 5, fiscal and operational stewardship. As we take a look at the COO's direct reports, you'll see on the right the Executive Director of Nutrition Services, Colleen Kohler, Executive Director of Transportation, Michael Slife, Director of Design and Construction, Scott Jensen, Director of Facilities, Wilson Bailey, Director of Logistics and Support Services, Steve Christopa, and Director of Operations, Ann DeLang. And last but not least, Executive Assistant, Lanisha Sterling. As we drill down further into the departments, Design and Construction, led by Scott Jensen. Director of Facilities, led by Wilson Bailey. Logistics and Support Services, led by Steve Christopa. And Operations, led by Ann DeLang. Taking a look at our highlights in distribution and print services, we've removed or recycled approximately 82,894 pounds of obsolete electronics over the past year. We deliver approximately 16,865 pieces of mail per month, and we average 310,000 impressions per month within our print services department. In facilities and operations, we continue to build upon our preventative maintenance best practices. Over this past year, we've continued our enhanced cleaning and sanitation protocols in relation to COVID, and we are currently tracking at our 90% success rate on our annual life safety work orders. Design and construction, this past summer we completed our 10 years facilities master plan. Over the past 8 months, we've been very busy with our ESSER 2 and ARP ESSER. We selected 3 engineering firms and a program management firm to help guide us through our $157 million ESSER 2 and ARP ESSER HVAC projects. And we've moved our phase 1 projects, which was 10 schools, from planning to design and now bidding. And those schools will be brought forward over the next few meetings for board approval. So as we look at our budget summary, we see a slight variance in salaries and benefits. That's mostly due to increase in insurance benefits and our scheduled salary increases. In purchase services, that variance really is tied to our contractual increase in our custodial services contract, as well as some utility expense. And capital, I'll point out the significant raise there is we have bleacher replacements that we'll be doing across the district, and we'll be relocating our print services from Sterling Holly to Operations Support Center over the next year. So we take a look at our contracts. I'll just point out 2 on this page. Our boiler and chiller analysis back in FY22, that was out to bid and we weren't sure how that was going to come in. And it actually came in lower than expected. So that's why we have the $83,000 variance there. And as I discussed earlier, our custodial services, that increase of $598,000 is part of our approved contract that was approved last year. I did mention a slight increase in our electrical service. I do want to point out here that as we proceed through our HVAC upgrades and bring more air conditioning on throughout the district, we will see our electric prices going up. We'll start really seeing those in FY25, a little bit in FY24. As we have a bid coming up too, and as everybody knows with electric and gas prices, we could see more increases there also. I will point out on this slide our energy management services, the increase of $19,000. That also was part of the contractual approved amount increase. And then Mark's tree service, our tree removal service. If you remember, we did a joint bid with the Park District. We've been very happy with the service that Marks has provided us. The increase really is our attempt to taking a much deeper look at our curb appeal at all of our schools, so making sure that our trees are trimmed nicely and taking down dead and straggly trees. We have no new requests in FY23. So we take a look at our capital budget, Fund 60. I'll touch on the supplies. You'll see a variance of a minus $3.7 million. That's because we completed our furniture plan last summer also. So we have also new furniture throughout the entire district. If we take a look at our capital, the variance of $1.8 million, in FY22, we completed some security vestibules, we completed electronic message boards, demolition of Page Park and Styles, which is nearing completion, and lastly, completed some renovations here at the administration building. As we go into FY23, we are going to complete the remainder of our electronic message boards at 7 schools. We have additional security vestibules that we need to complete. We will also be having parking lot replacements at East, Jefferson, Kennedy, and Risa, and roofing replacements at East, Ellis, Lincoln, Westview, and West. So that's really what makes up that variance there. As we move into our ESSER grants, we're estimating spending $55.9 million in FY23. I kind of want to break that down a little bit. So that includes our Phase 1 schools that will be under construction. That includes Bloom, East, Flynn, Guilford, Lathrop, Lincoln, Riverdale, Spring Creek, Washington, and West. These dollars also include our design and construction for Phase 2. And we plan to accelerate all of our design by bringing forward our Phase 3. And our hopes here would be to get these designed and get these out on the street as soon as possible. What we're hoping is that attracts more contractors to bid the projects, and as we award those sooner, it also allows us to start ordering material and getting that on the way. That's really what is going to put us a little bit behind in year one, that we were awarded the dollars and had to start planning, so there's some long lead time items, as everyone knows, on materials, but this right now is where our estimate lands. As we look at our life safety budget, once again, variance in the salaries and benefits, mainly due to insurance and scheduled salary increases. And then I'll just point out the capital line item decrease of $942,000. This fiscal year, we're replacing a roof at Fairview, and that's what the 1.2 is. This coming year at FY23, we'll be just replacing a small roof at Rolling Green. Looking at the contracts under life safety, we've got Cintas, who is our fire extinguisher, fire alarm inspections and maintenance service, and Carnell-Conabear that takes care of our environmental services, one item which is asbestos abatement. We have no new life safety requests. And our return on investment is to create spaces that promote learning, collaboration, and social health, control exposure to risk, and provide support to all schools and departments. Thank you. I'll take any questions.
Ms. McCulloch?
So in the past, for safety and security, did we ever, I thought we put some of our vestibules in under life safety. Never?
They weren't, no, not under life safety.
Okay,
yeah.
At one point in time, I know we were keeping track of how we were spending our ESSER funds, and it was supposed to be posted on our website. I haven't been able to find it. Do you know how I get there?
I'm not sure. I have to go to Greg on that.
We'll have to look.
Okay. We'll look into that, Ms. McCulloch, and get back to you.
We'll have that be one of the action items, and we'll have the team provide that link to the board tomorrow.
Thank you.
No one else? Okay, the 2023 budget requests for nutrition services and transportation will be presented at the March 8th board meeting, and the schools team will present at the March 29th board meeting. Are there any questions about the consent agenda items for March 8th? Okay, that completes our report.
Thank you for taking those on, Ms. Stanford. So I will now present the items for the Governance Committee, the consent items for March 8th, meeting minutes, contract purchase orders, possible workman's compensation, settlement, and freedom of information log. We will also be Bringing forward under consent the 2022-2023 academic calendar, the resolution of supplemental savings plan of the teacher retirement system of the state of Illinois, the REA amended and restated memorandum of understanding for RPS employer assisted housing program, the resolution continuing the employer assisted housing program for administrators, the memorandum of understanding for shift differential pay for RBMA, the memorandum of understanding for, and the following, these couple will relate to the academic calendar for next year, the following. So for RBMA Election Day 2022, an MOU for Election Day for the Educational Interpreters Association, IEA, NEA, the MOU for Election Day for 2022 for AFSCME Local 692, Council 31, the paraprofessionals, the MOU for the Election Day 2022 Educational Office Professionals Association, the MOU for Election Day 2022 for AFSCME Local 3210, Council 31 Nutrition Services, and the Election Day 2022 for AFSCME Local 1275, Council 31 Transportation. Consent items for 2/22/22 meeting include, what am I missing? Because we're past the 2/22. The consent items for the March 29th 2022 meeting include the meeting minutes, contract purchase orders, the academic calendar, the workers' compensation settlement, and the freedom of information log. Anybody have any questions about any of those items that will come back to us in the next two meetings? Mike?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't see Mr. Gallagher. Oh, he's hiding in the back. Okay, cool. Yeah, we've gotten some emails on it, so I just want to ask what kind of feedback process we had from teachers and in particular the union on the academic calendar.
Evening, everybody. I would say with regards to I can't speak towards conversations that Mr. Zedeker had with the various unions in terms of where they were with in sharing that with the feedback. I wasn't actually a part of that process. The process did originate with myself and my team collaborating with principals in getting their feedback for what they felt would be most advantageous for students. And of course, we'd also been receiving input from some of the board members yourselves in terms of what feedback that you had gotten or preferences that you may have had.
We did every step of the way involve the union president and vice president in the conversations as well. I don't know what process they use to share with their members, but they were certainly involved.
Yep, and they usually are. I think I just want to, because again, we get emails on this, and I think one of the comments I'm going to make is that we always, I think, try to make sure that we include folks like the heads of the unions on exactly this issue. And every year there's some complaining and all. I think one of the things I'm going to say generically is that if people have issues, they should go to their union representatives and express that we really, I'm just going to say for me as a board member, even though I've had children and now grandchildren in the school, I think the process for me is very principle based, and that's the way it sounded for a while, and that taking into consideration families and students, their needs, and balancing all that out is not an easy thing. And so what I'll say to the individuals that have issues is that this is I think a fairly rigorous process on this, and nobody's dictating this, and I think there's been balanced feedback. And so I wanted to bring it up and ask the question, and I kind of figured that would be the answer, but I think people have to understand that there is a process behind it, and the administration does not say, hey, we think this is the best, that we want to do. It's a process where they go out and get feedback from principals who presumably are talking to staff and parents. So
that's exactly what I was just going to add. We start with the principal input because they're the ones who are best positioned to get the input from multiple stakeholders at their buildings and go from there.
Yep, absolutely. And I brought it up because we always get this, and I think we want to make it clear to people this is based on a process, and they all, in a sense, really had a voice in it. So thank you.
June? I would ask the question, so these MOUs that are on here for Election Day, it was my understanding that the MOUs were going to be for Veterans Day and Indigenous Peoples Day. I didn't think we were touching Election Day. Would somebody tell me, Ms. Holdley, anybody?
Yep, Election Day is added this year, so it's an extra holiday, and so
So we're adding all those for those other unions because we have to be in school for the state.
Yeah, so because the calendar, because we're going to bypass Columbus Day and Veterans Day on their normal piece, but we won't have school on Election Day, which is not identified in their contract. We have added that in as an additional holiday for the 22-23 school year.
Wait a minute. So we are having school on Election Day, or we are not?
We are not having Election Day. It's a holiday for those units, for everybody.
That's right, because of the school system.
Correct.
But do we not have to have MOUs for the other 2 days for those unions that were supposed to be off?
Right. So for the ASME units as well as the hearing interpreters, we did already negotiate in their contract for certain holidays that if they are waived, then we could move them to a different date, or actually they would be paid over the Christmas holiday, depending on where the holiday fell, or over spring break. The difference that we did this time, though, is we actually moved the holidays, and the other move was for the January 2nd, which would normally be a holiday for all of our different units, except for the teachers. They don't have holidays identified in their contracts. So, but for all of the other units, those are designated holidays, and they did agree to waive January 2nd as one of their holidays, and actually, move it so it would fall before the New Year's Day.
So the question was, do we have MOUs with these units for moving these holidays, or do we not have to have that?
And yes, and that will be at the next. Well? Yes, and those are coming forward with the calendar as well.
Okay,
so they have
these
signed
aren't the only MOUs that I just read off. There will be more.
I thought it's at the Election Day holiday incorporates all the other holidays.
It does have all the other ones. That's the better question to answer. Thank you. All right. And there'll be copies of those for everyone to read. I didn't look through those. Are they on the draft agendas already? Yeah. Yeah, so you can look at those on the draft agendas. Thank you. All right, did I get through all mine? I think so. So we have follow-up items, which would be the website with regard to where we're spending our ESSER funds and the qualitative feedback from this CS survey. So were there any others that I've missed, board members? All right, I'd entertain a motion and a second to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Any all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Same sign. We are adjourned at 8:42. Thank you. This just did not charge. I'm still at 3%.